Which checklist is it? Admin review, 1A. It's probably,
Yeah.
tell me where it starts.
Well,
So these are different.
yeah,
Admin
in
review.
Cicero, we would check admin review, but then we would select the risk level, and that would, depending on that, it would generate either a full board
Either
or
a full
expedited.
board or an expedited review. Okay. Part of our problem is we have 103 views, okay, that have checklists on it. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to go into
I thought you had one, just a general and
Yeah.
initial
General admin.
application materials. Because all of the, I think that all of the
Try
others
admin.
are going to
Yeah,
disappear.
try that one.
we're going to see if we can actually see the view of this.
I mainly want to show you, Dennis, that this pre-review checklist,
Oh, yeah.
looking at the administrative review that they do.
Just the one with, no? Okay, so,
All right, well, we don't have to take a lot of time.
Can we go into beta and just assign one to ourselves?
yeah, so we're going to have to do it.
That's all right, we don't have to do it now. I don't want to hold Jeff up.
Okay.
I thought it was going to be.
No, as a matter of fact, when we redesigned the form, that's some of the
Right.
things not taken into
Right.
consideration.
This is where,
Yeah.
when you three,
Yeah.
just be thinking as we're going along, which ones you currently
Right.
use, which ones we're gonna, all right, good. That's all.
So, so I picture this, that this would be like this, and actually it would not vary by the type of review or anything. It would just be, you check these things and then pass it on to that. And in a sense, the final contingencies is also, for additional notes, that you want to pass on. Now, just in terms of, the other thing is that the first SOP, I didn't talk about this, the first SOP I sort of see as something that anybody can do, pretty much. It's more of a clerical issue. It's sort of, what is this, and let's pass it on. This one would be done by an IRB analyst. This could be done by analysts who are not IRB members, in other words, not designated reviewers. But this could also be done both by somebody this could be done also by somebody who's a designated reviewer. But essentially be filling this out, and then that travels with the application. In terms of this list on the back, my recommendation would be not to create a big long checklist in Cicero, but have something like this that is just it's a worksheet that you look at to do that. And there might be ways to sort of, have it pop up on the interface, and you read through it, make sure you got everything, and then you go fill out the list.
So the one you said, the one you said for anybody is the incoming information.
Incoming information, right. Anybody should be able to follow that. It's almost, if you look at it, it's almost secretarial. It's like,
Right. So that's Kate and Lynn.
if it's this.
Okay.
And this one, in peer review, would be the IRB analyst. So anyways, moving on to peer review. So the bulk of that is really working through the checklist. Then the issue is that if the investigator is, the information is not complete, contact the investigator and say it's not complete, and you offer them the opportunity to withdraw. If it gets withdrawn, then you would click a button, it would go into a withdrawn state and sit there. In other words, it'd be, and this is sort of, in a sense, what I kind of picture, and I don't know whether you can do this in Cicero, but there's sort of a, or you could do it as put it back in the draft state. That is, when an investigator first fills out a protocol, they may not get done, they can save it in the draft state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they save it, and then it's like they send it to you, and you go, oh, it's complete. They go, oh, thank you. I'll go re-edit it. That the staff could then put it back in the draft, or put it into a withdrawn state. I mean, a draft
Goes into what state, Cynthia?
Admin what's required.
and months required. I mean, in a
They
sense,
return it to the.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, functionally, you really only have to call it a draft state. I mean, it's really, because they'll give you the rationale, certainly for initial review, or for any modification. They could put in an initial application, and they can leave it in draft for 6 months, right?
Or a year or two.
Or a year or
That's
2
it.
years, okay.
That's right.
So it's really back in the same state. It's like back in your court.
It's just,
If you want to come back in 6 months, we'll look at it in 6 months. If you want to come back in a year, we can do that.
The issue that we do have with that, and yes, that is possible. The
Yeah.
issue that we have with that is the way that our system was initially designed is when it went from draft to department review to special review, and then it comes to our office.
Yeah.
So there could be 3 or 4 other sets of eyes on it before it even got to our office.
I
And one
see.
of those.
So you don't want to repeat those steps.
And if we put
That's
it back in the draft,
Yeah.
we could skip that step. We could say, well, if it's already done review, but if it needs to go into draft, that means there's probably major revisions that the department and
That's right.
specialty
I see.
and
I see.
such
Okay.
want.
No, then that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. So you put it in that state, and it just sits there. And if they never come back, they
Right.
never come back.
But you could argue that if there are significant revisions required on an admin mods, why wouldn't then they go back through the department and special reviews if there are
Yeah.
major revisions?
You're absolutely correct.
So,
I actually like the idea of having it go in. So currently it starts out in draft,
Mhm.
then it goes to department review.
Mhm.
So if it makes it through department review, then it comes into a state called admin review.
Mhm.
If the analyst sends it back, then it goes into admin mods required.
Mhm.
I like the idea of sending it back into draft for 2 reasons. One, the subconscious message to investigators, or not so subconscious. And number 2, then it's not for you to, because right now, these guys have, then it's kind of their responsibility to, what do I have out for admin mods required? And that, things sit out there for 6 months.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
I think the
if we
main
can-
thing, whatever state you have it in, it's a state that a protocol can have forever.
We'll make that change.
Yeah, logically, that makes a whole lot of sense. What happens now is, if a study needs major revision, and then this happens occasionally, the PI would withdraw the study.
Yeah.
And they may contact us 6 months later and say, I've made these changes. What do I do now? And then I have to administratively put it into the draft stage.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Interesting. So, yes,
This would
so
solve
that would
that.
solve that.
Yeah, and that does solve that problem.
Yeah.
It happens occasionally.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, there are a lot of things where it's an offer to an investigator to withdraw, and basically, it's essentially putting it back in the draft.
Exactly.
How difficult is that going to be?
It's some rewriting, okay, because
Yeah, but so rewriting like a day, a week, a month. Well,
a couple of weeks. Well, actually, it's just putting something into the workflow.
into a different state.
Right.
Instead
Okay.
of going to admin mods required, it goes back into draft.
Um,
And then it
from
should
admin mod,
follow
well,
that.
well, actually, all we have to do is add a transition from admin mods required. No, from admin review
to draft.
back to draft.
Right.
Okay, but it has to be back to a solid draft. Okay, because there's a solid draft and then there's a not so solid draft where it passes the department review, and that's why I do it administratively, so I can reassign those.
All right, well, that's on your list.
Yeah,
So
solid
so what's the difference between draft and solid draft?
Well, the initial review, the initial draft, okay,
Yeah.
it goes through the workflow. Okay, it goes through the process of department reviews, specialty review, and so on. We don't have a process right now where it goes from us, the HRPO, back into draft.
Yeah.
They withdraw it. I move it into the draft, and then what happens is, because it's already been through the review process, okay, I either have to determine, or I'm told,
Mhm.
either it goes back to the department review, or it goes back to our office.
So it's manual.
Yeah, so there's
Yeah,
a
no,
manual
no,
process.
you had said that a protocol can have a state called a draft,
Yes.
or it can have a state called a solid draft.
No,
No, that's
No.
that's the ter- no, that's the
that's his own.
Oh, that's your
terminology.
language.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's just the
From his
terminology.
The other thing, and I don't know if to do this, is that technically it's not the protocol that's in draft, it's the application. That's
The
in draft.
application.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Yes.
I do have a question
Yes.
before we move on. The incoming items directed to the IRB and the pre-review checklist associated with that. That's to be completed by the analyst. Is there a checklist as well? You said that could be completed by anyone?
No, incoming items has no checklist or
Okay.
worksheet associated with it.
Okay.
It's just a it's this, do this, it's that.
Okay, so there's no checklist to be.
So this
There's
is
no
all
checklist, yeah.
education for Ling and Kate.
Right.
Okay.
The pre-review
And everybody
is,
else, right?
the pre-review has, it used to be a separate worksheet and a separate checklist, and it's just put one in the back of the other on the same paper. So it's really a checklist that's driven by the worksheet on the back of the form. So the back of the form doesn't get filled out, it's just a bulleted list of these are the things to think about.
Okay.
And that could, and that's, so I think operationally what you probably want to have is have the form as a web form
Mhm.
and have the, the other ones that somehow come up. People want to refer to that. You don't want to skip that. You want to look at every single one and make sure everything's met. So that could either be some information item that comes up on click in some way, or it could be a piece of paper that you have on your desk or whatever. So
Technically, the easiest way for us to do this is to do an activity form when they assign internal reviewer. Okay, an activity form is that checklist.
okay, and when you assign an internal reviewer, that in other words that it's coming in, and somebody says it goes to this analyst.
Yes.
Yes.
Before they assign
So
it
the
themselves.
internal reviewer
That's
goes
right.
to the analyst.
That's right.
Yes.
It would really be helpful.
I can put it up if you want. But
Well,
tell me what you want.
I just want to be able to refer to it quickly.
Do you have dual screens?
Oh, no.
Okay. No,
Oh.
I mean on your desk. People, when those
No.
people using collecting, I feel okay.
We have a Vaunt browser.
Give away.
A Vaunt browser.
Okay. What's it called?
A Vaunt,
Yeah, well,
it allows you to flip back and forth from pages more easily than
Oh, I see.
Explore.
Okay.
Also, just back on the pre-review for final contingencies, one thing that we'll want to add is we have RSC and IBC approval. So with some of our others, so those are things
Right.
we can, those actually get blocked by the system.
I was
Oh,
gonna
they
say,
do? Oh,
they don't
okay.
need to do
Yeah, I
that.
don't think that.
No?
It's automatic, it's built in.
One of the, I'll tell you, one of the things
Okay.
that's in this
Cicero prevents
It
it,
from being approved.
right.
Got it.
Totally agree.
Okay.
and one of the things that's in this
And
SOP,
these-
which I think you already, it's nice that you're doing it outside of Cicero, is to not have the IRB in some cases be the final barrier to everything. In other words, if there's
Right.
IBC stuff
Mm-hmm.
that really doesn't have anything to do with human subjects, like how you're storing the vector or something. The investigator's just told, you can't begin your research until you have all your approvals.
Right.
And it's up to you to know your approvals. So one of the things that the
Mhm.
investigator manual is sort of this generic thing. It's your responsibility to make sure all approvals are met, not the IRB's. And to sort of get the IRB out of being the enforcer that, you've talked to grants, and that you've done this, and that your accounts are set up.
Well, the way Cicero functions, it does block an IBC
Right.
if it's human but there's a completely separate path that it doesn't have anything to do with human subjects.
Right. And
But it does
Cicero's
hold
nice
it
because
up.
it makes it more an institutional thing as
Right,
opposed to the IRB.
right, exactly. It's not.
So I mean, I'm thinking another way is on Cicero you have a link to your document management system that has the back page of this, and it just comes up, as another screen, and then you just flip back and forth. And the other thing with the peer review checklist, if you wanted, you could have another text box for comments. I didn't put that on there because then it makes it longer than a page. But you could either write on the contingencies, you could write, by the way, blah blah blah. Just, something looks really bad here, or whatever, or you could make a simple text box.
We use
So this
internal
checklist.
comments, but it's
Well,
not very
That's
clear.
not the-
It's separate, right? So it would be nice to have all of them.
Was this something to show, or do you want me to go?
Go on.
Okay.
Go on.
So the next thing is 5.3, that if there's an initial approval and somebody's restricted, that you explain to the investigator, give an opportunity to withdraw. If not, send it through. And then you evaluate for the most likely level of review. So you're going to say that this looks mostly like, looks like is it a non-committee review or a committee review? That's the only decision there.
How do you recommend,
What's it?
how do you recommend that what you refer to as the IRB staff communicate with investigators at this point?
Mean what media, or you mean what they say?
No, what media?
Some of it depends upon how hard it is. I mean, I always, whenever possible, I always like to get on the phone because I can sound sympathetic. I mean, you know, when I'm on the phone, I just wanted to let you know that I was looking through this and I noticed that you didn't happen to have this. And I just know that if this goes to the RB, they're gonna reject it, and wanting to let you know in case you wanted to withdraw it. But if you want, I'll send it to the RB. So it's sort of like that. And I know it's not easy because people are very busy and they're in clinic and they're doing other stuff and it's hard to get a hold of them. But so I don't have a. I mean, I do encourage people, if this is the issue, to say, you know, if you're not resolving things with an email, get on the phone. You know, just start talking. It's just not worthwhile. You know, if the first email didn't work, it's rare that emails keep working with more conversation.
Yeah, well, that's the reason I wanted you to say or address that, which might seem like a minor thing, but it's not. I want the analysts, I want you guys to hear it, and I want you, because there's a lot of retraining that has to go on, because the analysts' mode of communication has been primarily email and in Cicero through admin mods. And that's another point the research community has made about kind of the insensitivity of the email correspondence or just the admin mods. And we've talked about this, but I want to emphasize they need to be picking up the phone and trying to communicate directly with the investigator and not the study coordinator. 99% of the time, the staff here are communicating with study coordinators and study staff, and I really want it to be the investigator.
Yeah, and the other thing also is a suggestion is just looking at how people write emails. I've just seen where the one client I'm working with, they have the same problem. They don't talk to the investigators, and investigators are like, you know, many investigators are loggerheads to the IRB. And and I read these emails and I'm going like, ooh, you know, it's like, it just sort of sounds like you're talking down to somebody, and it's like, you know, unfortunately I can't give you the quote of the email, tell you what it was, but I just said, you know, take this line out, say please, and it like changes the whole tone, you know, and that would be the way I would communicate, not sort of saying the regulations require this and you failed to do this, you know. It's just sort of, you know, as opposed to, I noticed that this was the case and thought it would be helpful for you to know. You know, there's just ways to write it. I think also that if you do need to communicate in email, that makes life a lot easier.
And to make your list.
Okay, all right, okay. So, and the level of review, I think you can err on the side of expedited if you think it might be expedited. This is not to go through and sort of count up the blood draws and make sure, you know, it's like you're looking at, oh, it seems to be blood draws, and, you know, send it to expedited review. It'd be better to do that and bump it to convened RB than to, you know, put it on the convened RB and have them deal with a study that eventually was really expedited. And the idea is that most, you know, I think you read the protocol, you read like a few lines of the procedures, and you automatically know this is full board. You just send it there, and it's the sort of questions I'd make it the lower level of review and let it go through. So it's not, don't start filling up forms. Let the reviewers do that. So that's pre-review. The next step is what we're going to do now is, at the end of that, then probably in Cicero you're going to say this is expedited, or this is an on-committee or committee, really the two decisions. So that would be the decision. Or the other thing you might do is say the study's closed. So if you look at the flow sheet after peer review, where it says level of review needed, and so you're the study closure, placed on a meeting agenda, or non-committee review. So those would be the three selections in Cicero that would drive the workflow.
You guys, when we're going through this and you see something that needs to be put in, or you need to kind of walk through what you're doing, I mean, those kinds of things, like you just said, assign the internal, that needs, make sure that it's there.
The other thing that you may want to put, I'm thinking, from an automation point of view, is in the peer review, the analyst may want to flag whether this is initial review, continual review, modification, and so on. That's actually in the, it's sort of hidden in the protocol update section of this. But that's.
Do you mean in the SOP?
On Cicero. I mean, some of this, I'll tell you, some of this you can, if you do this, you can, you can say, fill out, I mean, you might put it on the form, how we do it that way. I mean, and you could certainly put instructions in Cicero and leave things out of the SOP. You have to, in other words, if you say, go to this screen in Cicero and fill it out, and that tells you everything to do, then you don't need to put it in the SOP. I mean, that's sort of the general philosophy. So you may need to look at how this eventually looks, and based upon that, maybe make some changes. Yes.
We actually, we already do that. We have separate pathways.
Well,
Initial review, continuing.
That's right, because they're going to come in by the investigators separate pathways, so it's going to be predefined. There's sort of be separate pathways. I guess the question is how to make them separate. I don't know if this way to probably may have to make separate workflows, but they're going to be identical workflows.
Not entirely.
I mean, well, actually, on this they'll be pretty much identical workflows,
Right,
so,
yeah.
but not.
They're not currently, but they
Not
will
currently,
be.
yes.
But,
yes.
and it's not, and it may be that they have to be 3 separate workflows for initial continuing modifications, even
They
though
Yes.
they are, even though they're all going to have the same blocks. And I guess I'm trying to think. I don't know if there's a way.
We're
whether
gonna
you
have
want
to. We're going to have to talk to you in depth and in gory detail about modifications and continuing review.
Yeah.
Without,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to take up that time here, but
Okay.
we
No,
have to sit.
it'd be interesting to see if you can pump in the same workflow, flag them, just have a flag in the workflow that says this is kind of a review, that it's modification, but basically all 3 applications pump into the same peer review page. So you don't have 3 peer review pages and 3, but it's essentially the same workflow, because again, they're pretty much the same. Yes.
So for Monique and Cynthia, so what I wrote there, so where it says assigned analyst, you know what the deal is, and you know why we have an internal reviewer and an assigned analyst. So if the assigned analysts were to be assigned to Ling and Kate, and they're the ones that set the review path, I mean, following the SOPs, right? This is a coordinator level person. I mean, but following the SOP,
Yes.
and assign the internal reviewer, we can change that assigned analyst to Ling and Kate, so that the research community isn't seeing like 55 different names all the time, but assigning them and matching them with their caseload because they're the ones staffing that meeting. Does that make sense? That's not written down.
So what I want to do is then I want to then walk through non-committee review. Walk through the sort of major things. So this is HRP 031. And this is, so what I'm doing is I'm going from the peer review stack, we're going to say, well, this is non-committee review. And then we're going to go to this second sheet with non-committee review, and that's on the top for what happens. So this is how you prepare for non-committee review. It begins when the previous SOP says this is for non-committee review. It ends when you've given the stuff to the designated reviewer. You select a designated reviewer, so you're going to assign that in Cicero. And then under a paper system, you would prepare the materials that they would need to use, the worksheets that they need to use, and the other things. Now, the worksheet review materials, let me just show you that. I think 301. So what you want to do is that this is going to be a policy. Right now, in a paper world, you would take these documents and you would put them in a packet and you'd hand them to somebody and you say, fill that out. You don't have to. You have a system where everything you need is online. So what you want, on the other hand, you have a system in which everything that's online does not need to be reviewed by everybody. So what you want to do is say to people, this is what you have to review. So these become a set of expectations. It's a little bit more difficult, and this is a training thing. It's saying, if you have this status, you are to review what's in this list, depending upon the kind of review. And so you're not going to prepare the agenda packet, obviously, but it is going to be a policy that IRB members are expected to review this, and that's what you're going to have to train people, maybe beat people up a bit to do that.
Who completes the worksheet review materials? Because these items need to be checked off, correct?
No,
No, they
it's
don't.
just
Okay.
it's styled. So
Okay.
You can make out a bullet.
So this correlates to you assigning the reviewer and assigning the checklists
Okay.
to the reviewer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then essentially, in a paper world, you would add a non-committee review checklist to each box. That's going to be a web screen in that. And I'm in 5.3. I'm sorry, back on the non-committee. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And you would, in a paper world, give them worksheets to the most likely level of review. What I think you want to do then is have those worksheets available and checklists available electronically, and we have to figure out how people are gonna fill that out. And then there's a notification. So this would be essentially I think what this will probably be is going to be an SOP that just says, pick the person to do the review, and that's it. And then Cicero's going to take care of the notification and the other things that they need to do. I'm also thinking that this SOP, since it's going to be one line, might actually be, and you might also be, it might, actually this might link directly, it might link automatically. So if you say, if you click, so on the click screen, on the Cicero screen, you're going to have the final options would be close, full committee review, or non-committee review. And if you click non-committee review, the next screen that's going to come up that says who's the reviewer. So this in a sense is going to be following the same person.
All right, so ours come in.
That's why I had that was in beta.
Yeah. So ours come in and see the review path up there.
Expedite review.
So it comes in.
This one came in as to be determined. If you click on the just run back underneath the deck, this is what the activity looks like.
No.
Yeah.
It comes in to be determined.
Okay.
What's stated there to be determined.
Under review path states to be determined.
Yes.
Okay.
And then over the person assigns it. And
Okay.
over on the left there, it says adjust review path. So
Yeah.
they'll adjust the review path.
Okay, well,
So
I
you
think
do that. And then
this you want to change, because what you want it to say is, it's gonna start out to be determined, and then it's gonna go to full committee or administrative or non-committee, committee review or non-committee review.
Okay.
It's the reviewer that's gonna then decide whether this is exempt exempt, expedited, full board, and so on. This is actually on the other thing. An emergency review. I don't know what emergency review is.
So we have send to designee EC. And you choose a reviewer.
Yeah.
And then they assign the checklists to that reviewer that need
Yeah.
to be completed.
Okay.
So that can be themselves, it can be.
Correct.
Or it can be somebody else.
But I think you probably want an intermediate state, you don't want to pigeonhole it before it goes to review.
So assign internal
So we
reviewer.
have internal reviewer.
In other words, you see what I'm saying? Because I think what you're saying is it comes in to be determined,
Right, and then
then
we
the
assign
analyst says this is expedited, and it goes to reviewer. What you want to do is the analyst just says it's non-committing, and so it's got a non-committee status, and then it goes to the reviewer to decide whether it's exempt, expedited, or non-committed.
So back that up, it's
Yeah.
gonna be the coordinators or an analyst could assign it to internal
Committee.
setting the see if we get in, I don't wanna get into changing paths and changing this workflow because that's gonna be more difficult.
Okay.
So if if Cynthia's, or even me, I mean, if I'm the one looking at it and I say, okay, I'm gonna change the review path, and at that point, it really is
Committee reviewer, non-committee.
full board or not.
Right. Yes.
And then you don't even have to say anything. Maybe you could just go in and do the full boards and the modification. We need to get into that detail. Then assign an internal reviewer because they're going to be the ones doing the review.
Yeah.
Along with the EC. Then they will decide whether it's exempt, expedited.
Correct.
And
That's the way it should.
So
the analysts are not, we are not going to be deciding the type of review. We're going to send it to the EC for them to decide the type.
you're going to be the EC,
Okay, okay,
Oh,
all right.
what's
You are-
EC?
the executive committee.
Oh.
So
Okay.
let's get it clear. So see how it says send to designee or EC?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, coming out of this training, remember last week on day one, I talked about when we come through this, all of the analysts are going to be designated reviewers.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're going to be.
Okay.
You're actually going to be conducting the reviews for non-human subjects research determinations, exempt determinations, expedited reviews. You're going to be conducting them, making the decisions, and taking the action. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So, and what Kate and Ling become is they're going to be staffing the meetings, coordinating activities. They can do some of this stuff, like when everybody was on vacation and I was sitting there clicking one after one, changing the review path.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to sit there and hit full board, or for Jeff's sake, we'll say not full board. But in our scenario, we have our choices are
Full review and expedited review.
right.
Oh, okay, so if it's exempt,
Well-
that's expedited review.
See the send to exempt activity.
Well,
Oh, I see, yeah, see, that's where you want to,
Expedited, do you have to change that?
Which one?
Exempt.
We have to change the review path.
Okay, so we actually, right, so
It's not
actually,
what I was thinking, that everybody could see.
well, actually, yes, this view is,
Yeah, well,
so in order to
If
send
it's not
something to
reviewed.
exempt, the analysts don't have send to exempt unless you change your review path again to exempt. I mean, you have all of them
Yeah.
because you're a site administrator. So some of these are different. So right now, they would only have send to EC designee.
Mm-hmm.
And if you change to
But
exempt,
if you
then,
choose it yourself,
right,
Or
then
just
you
the
see
review
it
path.
because you're the reviewer.
Right.
so it would,
So if you decide it's exempt, then you hit
yes,
send to exempt.
right.
I mean, well, in a sense, yeah, I mean, in a sense, there won't be any changing your review paths. I mean, you still might have it in there, but it really should not, because basically the reviewer is going to say, the expedited reviewer is going to say, this is exempt, this is non-human research, this is something, or they're going to say, really, I really don't know, and it's going to stay where it is. until they talk with other people and they make a decision. And the only reason it would change would be because, you know, somebody said, oh, you made a mistake, that's unexempt, send it back and do it expedited. It'd be something like that as opposed to, you know, somebody would have said this is exempt, and then they review it with me and I look at it and go, you got it wrong. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense, except for there could be, so Kate and Ling, the coordinators, they're gonna adjust the review path. And then we get it and we'll assign ourselves as
Just like we've been
Just
doing the past few weeks.
Right.
Yeah, somebody else is assigning it to you.
Mhm.
So I actually think that Jeff may have a point because, so if you assign this to me,
Right,
and just send it. I think as the designee reviewer, I would have the option to make it exempt even if it didn't come to me as exempt.
okay,
So I think that's going to be a non-issue.
okay. Because I was thinking of the case where usually we just choose full board or expedited.
And that's
Yes.
really to manage workload.
Right. And then expedited may need to be changed to exempt, may need to be changed to an HSR, and the person doing the review, the designated reviewer, would do that.
Yeah, change to exempt. So you just do it in your designated review.
Can you change it to?
Oh no, it goes back to the analyst. Okay, so we'll have to
You
do
need to cut out those.
extra.
Yeah, there's a couple extra steps in there, simply because that's the workflow with
Yeah.
the
Right.
EC right now.
Right.
So,
All right, so, well, this is how I see it. I'm sorry. So
Okay.
the analyst is going to take it and they're going to, and after pre-review, they're going to send it to non-committee, committee, or close.
Okay.
They have those three choices. If they go non-committee, it's going to go either to the same analyst or to another analyst. And that analyst is going to pick a designated reviewer.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking at this point, it's got non-committee as its review path. And the analyst then that goes to designated review. The designated reviewer is going to make one of four choices: exempt, expedited, non-human research, or full board. Now, full board then will essentially be back here. It's gonna shunt it to that one. But that's really what it is. So there's no now. So I mean, so you have in a sense, the designated reviewer can change the review path from committee, non-committee to committee, which they have to be able to do.
Mhm.
And I think these things would only change when somebody said, you know, you looked in retrospect and said, oh, they give it an exemption. This is really expedited. We've got to put it back. And I mean, that I think that's more an exception kind of thing than I see as, you know, I'm sure, I don't know how, my guess is Click has some way to handle exceptions. In other words, I'll give you an example of an exception. It goes to a reviewer and the reviewer says, I've got 57 things on my desk. And you got you don't have anything on your desk, and it's just because I happen to get the top protocols. So you make an exception and you move that to somebody else. You move the pathway to somebody else's responsibility or things like that. So I don't know if it's a screen or something, but, you know, but you got to change. Okay, you got to think of change. But basically that, and in a sense, it would really be, you know, what I would say is if there were a mistake made, you would essentially change the path back to non-committee review and have it pick another reviewer.
Right, so you could reassign a designated reviewer.
Yeah.
That's what I did just doing.
Yeah. But it's yeah. But it would be, I mean, in a sense, if you change review path, you would either change it to committee or non-committee and go back to that state again. And somebody would look at it and go, yeah, am I making things too complicated? Am I making things too
Well,
difficult?
there are reasons in Cicero that we have the change review path for managing workload, for managing committee review, and everything else that's not committee review. And in those,
Yes.
So as the initial quick triage, it would probably be done by the coordinators. It's either committee review or expedited, and we consider everything that doesn't go to the full board in our expedited.
That's
so
fine.
that's
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
distinction is.
Okay. I mean, hopefully, if you, I would, the other thing is that's probably in a config file, you can probably change it to.
We can call it non-committee.
Non-committee
Yeah.
review part.
Right.
Okay.
But the
Hopefully they
workflow,
do it so it
is
translates
fine.
into French. You
Yes.
make it the same way you translate it to French, you translate it to other.
The goal here is to change the workflow in Cicero as little as possible.
I see.
If we can work with, because it's not grossly different.
Okay.
Trust me when I tell you, it's not. We'll call
Okay.
it for a committee if we're making it.
You don't make me. So non-committee review conduct is the next one, which is HRP 032. And they have to review all materials, determine the level of review. They need consultation, follow the SOP in consultation. And they complete the checklist non-committee review. So this is the second checklist that gets filled out. And you have to finish everything in 5 days, otherwise they get locked out of the system.
So, all right.
Maybe
So,
we can make IRB members restricted, they do research.
so this is non-committee review. So
Okay.
this is IRB analysts as well as chairs or vice chairs conducting the reviews. And you can highlight or red circle the 5 days.
So the so non-committee review is has a checklist, which is HRP 402. This also, I see, would be a form that you and you might do some changes, but essentially, here's where, so the form has the type of review, whether it's a request for human research, initial review, continuing review, and in a sense, this goes away because it's all driven by system. What kind, that you don't really
So
need.
you can get rid of that.
The reviewer has to indicate whether they have a conflicting interest and that all contingencies in peer review have been met. And then they make a determination that what is it? Is it non-human research? Is it human research not engaged? Is it whatever? And they make a determination. Now this could be simplified to some degree, depending upon how you actually do this. Because you could, there's issues here where say it's approvable, but we could make it non-human research with modifications. It's okay to make this a form that it's just they don't fill it out. In other words, if you say it's expedited, but if you did this, it'd be non-human research. You can just not fill out the form, and you as an analyst call up the investigator and say, "Hey, I want to let you know this. Would you be willing to do that?"
Okay.
And they say yes, and then basically it would be the question is how can we do this so that we don't have to withdraw the protocol at this point. But that's sort of because what you really want is you want it in a state. Actually, you can make it it's almost like a modifications required to secure approval. You put it in that state, and you're going to wait for them to get back to you.
How difficult would it be to add an activity that says that the analyst can select non-human subjects research?
We
We
have that
have
already.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, so,
Well, I've already assigned it.
I mean, if they enter a path other than non-human subjects research
oh, you can
path.
do that now.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you adjust review path, so this has already been assigned,
Yeah,
but if you adjust review path and select NHSR, the NHSR activity populates.
Where's the just?
Just pick any other submission that may be. We have actually had this question recently because
So
we
if
had
you
some come up that did a constitution and subjects research, but they submitted a full expedited or exempt application. And if you just change the review path,
so you can select non-human subjects research, and it will generate the letter to them that says this is not human subjects.
without changing their application.
Without having to send it back to them to change the review.
Right, because we're not. I mean, the application forms that actually are not going to be different. So for each of these things. So I mean, in a sense, the final outcome of this is are going to be these choices where the reviewer is going to say what's the final outcome, and the final outcome in essence is going to be that it's not human research, it's exempt, it's approved under expedited, or it's a modifications required to secure approval. This is a little bit more here for a paper system, but It really could be as simple as that. And or you could have another holding. I mean, I guess you could have you could, yeah. I guess you could still have it. I mean, the other one might be you could. I guess I would have it to be determined. It would sort of sit in your queue until you got communication back from the investigator and revision.
So each of these pathways right here, this is an administrative review, meaning this would be the current system. This is in an analyst's lab.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So they can select any one of these review paths. And it doesn't require the investigator to do anything different. Okay.
And I guess I mean these are review paths or they are determinations.
Well, they're review paths. So see, Dennis has all of the options here on the left. So he is not human subjects research
Yeah.
because he is an administrator role. But the analysts don't. So in order to get that activity, the first one, not human subjects research, you have to select review path NHSR. Otherwise, that activity is not available to you as an analyst.
That's the non.
So it is a
And this is the
determination.
actual determination.
Yes.
So this is what we do when we confirm that something is not human subjects research. And
So,
this
so
generates
the
a
goal
letter.
here is to try and minimize the change.
Right, so currently our NHSR application has, it's significantly more abbreviated than our exempt or expedited
Right.
application.
Yeah.
So the question came up earlier, so for instance, earlier this week, if something is NHSR but they submitted an expedited application, should I send it back to them and have them change it to NHSR? And
Right.
because, no, you just change the review path and just process it as NHSR as
And
is.
make
So I
the
guess-
determination.
Can the reviewer just fill out something like this and just say here's the 4 choices, which one is it?
Fill out something like
Fill
this.
out this. Well, basically, it's going to have choices of either. It's either. In other words, it's sort of like that screen to change to select the review path,
Okay.
except instead of
As a designated reviewer?
As a designated reviewer, you have the ability to also do that.
I guess it's sort of, in other words, can the reviewer be presented with it? This is for the reviewer. The
Here.
reviewer be presented with a screen.
So here's the reviewer screen.
Okay. Okay, so what the reviewer, the reviewer needs to say not only approved, but really needs to say, I mean, in a sense, that this is the screen, but the screen would be, it's not human research. It's exempt. It's approved under expedited, or there are modifications required to secure approval, or it's closed.
Opposed.
Well, technically, the issue is that somebody could, an analyst could miss the fact that all study-related procedures were finished and miss that it was closed. But if the reviewer picks it up and said, well, you're not doing any more research anymore, so they would close the study.
I guess we have all of those options, but just not right here, from what I'm saying, from what I understand.
Yeah.
When we are adjusting the review path,
That
as an
changes
analyst,
things.
we're making the determination.
The major
we're
difference
processing.
is ours come in either down in they're a non-human subjects, an exempt, expedited, full board,
Mhm.
emergency use. It starts out new application, and then so when it comes in here, then it's either greater than minimal risk or it's minimal risk.
Mhm.
So it's full board, full committee, or non-committee review. But then it's separated out, for them making the determination, non-human subjects, exempt, expedited. And each of those are parsed out.
Yes.
Yes.
Does that make
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
So the designated reviewer has options based upon that adjust review path. So we do the initial when it comes in, full committee or expedited. Expedited is the label we use for everything
non-committee?
for non-committee. And then so for instance, say this was exempt. And initially, Kate changed it to expedited because it's not going to full committee. And then I review it and I determine that it qualifies for exempt status. I change the review path again to exempt, and then my activities change, and what I send to the EC changes their options under that window. So they have the option now to process as exempt or to send it back to the analyst because they don't believe it meets them.
That's what you want to avoid. You don't want to do that. I mean, there shouldn't be any reason, if somebody looks at it and says, this is not expedited, this is exempt, they should be able to check a box, it's exempt to the store. And fill out the exempt form.
Well,
that's what.
Yeah, and
That's how
that's
it
the
was
workflow.
set up. At the very, that's how, but that's,
yes. And that's the way that we can reset it when the analysts become board reviewers.
that's right.
Okay, because those activities will then be presented to them. Okay, so they can actually skip the analyst review, assign it to themselves as a board reviewer, do the board review, bam, it's done. Okay, so it does eliminate that.
So
Yeah.
just
middle
so
section.
we need to, so the review path needs to be full committee or non-committee. Non-committee, and so for Kate and Ling to assign it one of those, they only have two choices.
That's right.
And change
Or
analyst to
close,
coordinator.
But that, you see our closure, well, we gotta
Yeah,
fix it.
yeah.
But then we need to get rid of multiple steps to have an internal reviewer, then an EC. We need to work on how can it go from coming in to be determined to either getting on an agenda for a fully convened panel or getting assigned to a designee.
That's actually what you're asking is very easy because,
Right.
and that's also what you said as well.
Yeah.
But that's actually very easy because there has to be an activity. They have to actually physically do an activity. We can assign it to them as part of their workload, okay, and then it appears in their inbox. But there has to be an
When you say
activity.
they, you're talking about.
I'm talking about Ling or Kate,
The coordinator.
the
Yes.
coordinator, any coordinator, okay? We can assign some. But there has to be an activity that they perform in order to do that. So
Mhm.
if we still make the assigned internal reviewer, we can change the name to anything else we want. But we add that activity in here. Is it committee or not committee? Okay, review. Okay, they assign it to themselves. They make that determination.
No, it would be sent to designee.
Send it as designee. Okay.
So it would the internal reviewer thing would be if we want to use that to change or something, but like Kate should be able to say this is getting on the agenda of the meeting or it's getting assigned to the form of EC. Okay,
Okay.
so leave the analyst review out of it because that's going away. The analysts become EC members
Okay.
as
No, okay, so the,
Right.
just,
Yeah,
I'm gonna get to
right.
my closer down.
I'm sorry.
The analyst is the person who's doing peer review.
Yes.
Okay. Then,
Currently.
what I would suggest is that the analyst is basically gonna be making the decision, committee review, not committee review, closed.
No,
No, that's
coordinator.
So
Well, who's doing peer review?
your pre-review, the coordinators are going to be doing that.
Oh, the coordinators, okay, so the coordinators do peer review. And they're gonna make the decision, non-committee, committee, closed. Okay. Then, I see, and then the coordinators then, if they pick non-committee, because I picture, if they pick non-committee, they're gonna be taking another screen saying pick the reviewer. And if they choose committee, it's gonna get another screen, I guess, saying pick the committee, or something.
No,
Or
it comes
maybe
in
not.
already assigned to a committee.
So if they pick committee, click the
They don't
Cicero assigns the committee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So they just need to sign the reviewer. Then the reviewer is going to get a screen that's going to say, you're either going to give it a category of approval. You're going to make it. We'll have to talk about this a bit, but let's say for right now we're just going to say pending, meaning I'm still talking with the investigator. We haven't made a decision, or you're going to send it to full board or close it. Okay. And then the issue is that this is sort of a difficult issue because is that so let's say you look at it and you say it needs changes, or if you make these changes, we can change it to a different level of review. The question is how that workflow is done. Whether you can say you just make it pending, you have a communication with the investigator, they submit more documents, you look at them, you say it's okay, or they submit a revision. But and I'm thinking probably the best. I don't know. Let me think about this. I mean, it may be that you send them back to the investigator. You talk to them and they say, yeah, I'll make those changes. You send them back to the investigator in a state that's sort of like modifications required to secure approval, such that when they submit that again, it goes back to you. In other words, so it can use the same workflow, because we'll talk about modifications required to secure approval. Okay. So then it would be off your desk until you hear back. Okay. Plus they've had a 30-day timer. Okay, so
Just have to create an activity to do that.
now, this then, the final determination form also, if we make this like a screen, is also going to drive what other people do. So in other words, if they check, you could, and it's a matter of how you do this, but if they check exempt, then what you want them to do is then get a form in which they can document the exemption determination, which is going to be the exemption checklist, which is the next checklist. So, and if they can't document everything in an exemption checklist, it's going to take them back to a previous screen.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so there's one of two ways, and if they check exempt, they also need to fill out this exemption determination checklist, and that should be in Click.
And what's the exempt checklist that we have in Click now?
It's the admin review checklist.
So
that's why I was thinking, because the activity is there to send to exempt. Okay, the checklist could be right here.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and then it would actually, rather than attaching a checklist and being part of the review, it would be an activity. Okay.
Okay. So
It's simpler.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying.
All right. So
Pull up and let me see what is completed right now.
Assign, create review checklist. Okay, I just click I am review. And the first checklist.
So all of these obviously can be changed.
Go to a shortened.
So when you check the thing, there's something like review by exempt on the left-hand side.
Mhm.
That's what it said. That switches workflows.
Send to exempt, that actually
Send to-
sends it to the EC designated reviewer for final exempt review determination.
When you continue, then look at all your options.
Okay, so this screen would need to be. I mean, you want a screen that has this. That's
Right.
basically.
So this.
And yeah, I guess I'm not sure what the send to exemption is, because it's not, and maybe it's just I'm caught in the word send, as if it's
Right, so
given to someone else or
staff sending it to one of the chairs.
Yeah.
That's what,
So that's
so
going to
that's going to change.
that's going to change. So it'll be a staff member. You can call it exempt determination, or call it, we
I
can.
mean, there's sort of a couple ways to. I mean, one would be, in a sense, when the reviewer says exempt, can either they're either saying, I think it's exempt, I'm going to fill out the exempt form. If they can't fill out everything in the exempt form, they're going to have to go back and check something else. Is sort of what it is. Now I don't know if that's part of the workflow or if you just say, I can't do that, so I'm doing it another way. But essentially, that's the. And then if they say it's expedited, they're going to have to fill out the next checklist, which is the exemption determination checklist for the category of review.
So,
and they're going to
click
have to
continue, please. So this form, the SMART form, the first page needs to look like this. You've got it broken up.
Yep.
You
I
got
got
it. We need.
And then eligibility. Now, if they're doing expedited review, then they need to do the worksheet. They don't need to fill it out, but they need to use the worksheet. The worksheet may, or the pre-review may prompt them for other checklists, like a waiver of consent or a children's checklist or something like that. They're going to need to come up, and those checklists are in here, and then they need to. In a sense, what I see is that you'd have a it's not ways to do it, but that that the reviewer, by the time they get done with a review, will be a series of, in a sense, documents. There may be things in a SQL table, but they're in a sense a set of documents, so that if they're exempt, there is an exempt form associated with it. If it's non-human research, there is optionally a non-human research form associated. If it is full bore, if it's expedited, there is optionally, if needed, the waiver, the children, the prisoners, etc. Those associated with it. And so with the exempt, you could have, 4 or 5, rarely, but you could theoretically have 4 or 5 additional checklists that have to be associated with that.
That is back where they assign the checklist.
Yeah, although you got to be open to the fact that the reviewer may talk with the investigator and may decide to take out the waiver. So, in the end, it needs to be. They may need to change that status and then not pull in those sheets.
We have the activity to unassign checklist. Like if we've assigned one, you
Yeah.
can,
Yes.
you can essentially unassign it. You delete it.
As long as they
You
have
know.
Yeah, and I guess
Right.
now the only thing
That's
I'm
not
worried
how
about.
it works.
Actually, we have the option to delete all currently assigned checklists that are in process, not completed by it to any given reviewer.
Yeah, I guess the thing I'm worried about with activity is that it's really internal to the expedited reviewer, as opposed to being somebody else coming by and doing it. So I'm just not sure how using the word activity, but it's like a.
Activity is something that is performed by someone in the system. Anything could be an activity. I think the best way to meet these criteria to solve this is to actually use the checklist we talked about this before. Use a checklist with branching, so that if you choose waiver of consent, the next section gives you the waiver of consent question.
Exactly.
Rather than having to assign individual checklists that you may miss.
So here's one picture. Is that it would be exempt.
That's right.
Non-human research. Expedite. Okay, so what I sort of picture would be that they could check off non-human subject research, but they might also optionally be able to check off the worksheet So if they want to document additional things, they can, but it's not required. If they check off exempt, it's going to automatically take them to the exempt worksheet.
Mhm.
If they check off expedited, based upon what the analyst put in, it would pre-populate these checkboxes, and then they could change that if they want. And then when they go forward, it's going to take them through all those checklists.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think what you're going to have to do is decide what to do functionally with the worksheet. I would recommend, given the volume of your sizing, I strongly recommend that you do not automate the worksheet. I mean, in the sense of that it's something that people fill out. You can have the worksheet come up and say verify all these things are true on the screen. Yes, next. I mean, but don't save that worksheet. Don't fill out data.
Yeah. That's what I was talking
And so you can do something like that. And then actually the worksheet. Yeah, I don't want to do that. I think something. Does that make sense? Is that doable?
I have a quick question. The expedited and then the different subcategories of that, waiver of consent, waiver of documentation,
Yeah.
that is generated by the pre-review and what's selected. Is that what you're
What's
what you're referring to?
pre-selected is generated by the
pre-selected?
pre-review,
Okay.
but the reviewer has the option to change
Okay.
it. So
Great.
it drives it, but it doesn't force them
Okay.
to do it. So if they want to make a change, they can do that. And I also picture that this I don't know if you can do that, but it's almost like if they checked expedited, these would show up.
Mm-hmm.
But if you didn't, but if you checked exempt,
Those would
it wouldn't show up because, or it would be grayed or something because it's not relevant to an exempt research study.
How much development time?
Can't give you an answer on that, but I think that to simplify it, we have the three paths. Okay, when it's in the analyst court, okay, we just change it to three paths. It's then what Dr. Cooper suggested. They make that decision right on the first screen, and then it branches off to a set of checklists, a smart form. Okay, and based on how they answer those questions, more questions may be populated, less questions may be populated. So therefore, rather than it becoming a checklist that's attached to the system, it's actually an activity form, okay, that's attached to the system that you can go in and look at as part of the history of it. Okay, these are technical things to get
Right.
through. And at the end, the decision is made.
Okay. Give them access to.
Sure.
Right, because the problem is the amount of what development time it's going to entail.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah.
If we can,
I'm painting the ideal, and I understand it's another goal of minimizing time and development. I have no idea what is involved with doing this. So, which is sort of why I'm curious to just sort of see what it looks like.
I don't know the answer. I can't give you a time.
But the idea is that on the beta system, you would create there'd be a new workflow that would sort of leverage off the work done.
Yes.
Try and leverage as much as that and build that thing.
Yes. Okay. Rather than going to a separate checklist system where those checklists are assigned, as they currently are. Okay. Maybe we make it a smart form.
well, think about doing away, if we could do the smart form that you've got reconfigured. I mean, we'll look at that with Jeff, but thinking about forget about what we have right now. But the single point of entry, the workflow, using the workflow goes from draft to department review to here. The coordinators assign it, well, it's either assigned full board, full committee, or it's non-committee review. That non-committee review, it gets assigned a reviewer, and that reviewer makes the determinations of non-human subjects, exempt, expedited, with the checklists that they need to document, the worksheets, access to the worksheet that they need to follow, fill out the checklist, click the button, make the determination. That's what it is, right? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So just a question. I mean, if you created a blank workflow, can I play with it?
Yeah.
Without destroying the system.
Yeah.
in the play system.
Yeah.
In beta or development?
No.
Development.
No, not in development either because it's attached to the source safe. I'll have to ask Gina where she's,
Okay.
you know, where's the sandbox? We have a pre-dev kind of thing.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, no, I'm just
Okay.
curious. But, anyway,
Okay.
so basically, when the reviewer is done, it's going to be it's going to be one of those four. You know, it's either approved exam, approved exam, approved expedited, approved non-human research, or determination of non-human research. It's going to be closed or modifications required to secure approval. Essentially, what it is. And then and then based upon that, then that's going to drive the post-review SOP. So if we go to the post-review SOP, which is a little bit forward, it is 052. And this part is, and the first thing could be automated. That is, if the non-committee reviewer indicates conflicting interest, it automatically kicks it back to an analyst for reassign. If there's something about this, I think the next one, if information has changed, that would be automatic. Or if and change in principal investigators and research staff would be automatic. For initial or continuing review, we'd add a deadline for receipt of continuing review application 45 days before the application. So this would be automatic. The review indicated modifications required to secure approval, there would be a deadline set for 30 days. Or, I mean, I think in Cicero, I would.
This is what we call what kind of notice do they get? Investment contingencies. They get a notification.
They do. They get a notification, and then they get a reminder after we just changed it to after the first 5 days.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I did 6 days. Yeah.
6 days.
So BPM systems I'm familiar with, the commercial ones, have what they call timer workflows.
Mhm.
They're not initiated by a form. They're initiated by a timer going on.
Mhm.
And then the timer and actually there would be a timer each day that would go up and would say, go back and check all the continuing reviews that are, all protocols, see what their continuing review date is. If it's 45 days before the continuing review date, do this. And so do you click that?
Yes, and it's called they're batch jobs.
Okay.
In Cicero.
Okay.
And we
So-
set the terms. And,
So these could be replaced by batch jobs.
yes.
Really.
Actually-
in a sense, all this stuff could be batch jobs, and there's no need to set anybody to set anything. And I think that what you don't want to do is take this out. You want to put it in your policy. So that would be policy statement. The worksheet calculation review intervals, Cicero is going to do automatically. So I don't know. Do you have some way to how do you do consent documents? In terms of dates, you physically stamp them, or they electronically? There's a
Just walk through.
yeah.
Okay, so protocol gets approved, the consent forms, we have an edit consent form activity on the left side of the
Oh,
screen,
actually, what's it?
where we were looking at non-human subjects and all that. So
And it's a Word version, or it's
it's a Word version that they
Okay.
upload, and we give them back a Word version for future revisions, and we also stamp and PDF the approved version for them to use.
so it's a PDF stamp, or it's something you enter into the Word document.
We
I'm just
enter into the
curious.
Word document, PDF it, and get them the PDF.
Okay. So is it like you type it, or it's some automated field? Or?
We type
Type
and
it.
apply
Okay.
the logo.
All right. It's actually the same as what I got.
Yeah.
Right, but that's not how it's going to stay.
Oh, okay.
So the new version, the new upgraded version of Click has the automatic watermarking, date stamping, and versioning.
Okay. I hope they do it right.
So,
No, I'm seriously, because there's a couple things. One is if you look at the template consent, So
9 sections, templates.
you know, it's after the dance. First, go to any signature block.
I don't know.
All right, so I'm gonna recommend 2 things. One is that don't say this consent form expires on this date, because someday somebody's going to get into a lawsuit about that. Because the consent form does not expire. It's just that you can't use the consent form after a certain date. Second thing, I'd stay away from the term expiration date,
Mhm.
because if you ask people, if you tell people these eggs expire on August 15th, does that mean you can't eat them on August 15th, or it means you can't eat them on August 16th? Nobody knows. So I like this. I like to put it on the signature block, because I've had the experience many times that it's the subject that picks it up. Because it's like their signature right next to the date, and they go, wait, hold on, it says don't sign this.
Mhm.
And they go, oh, you're right. That's one. I have a form date on there, which is essentially the version date. It's really the date that whatever you want, the date the IRB approved it, but it's essentially the version date, so that they can do that. And somebody else found that they, just to make sure and subjects don't miss it, is that the do not sign after this date is also on the first page. You don't have to do that. But I think that the main issue is, and this is what I'm worried about, like, is they're going to stamp it expiration date, or they're going to stamp it with something in it, and people get in trouble with that.
Well, I think we have to similar to that wording.
Yeah. But otherwise, however they version it, it's fine.
But validity dates, okay, as opposed to expiration.
I would just say do not sign up for this date. The reason, here's the deal. I mean, just think, when you say this consent form is valid from this date to this date, the subject signed the consent, and 3 months later, that consent form is no longer valid. What does that mean?
Mhm.
The consent form is good in perpetuity. It's just that it can't be signed
Mhm.
after that date. That's really what the thing is. And then you want to make sure that Click calculates the dates right, because I've seen a lot of things say, that the IRB approves it on August 15th of 2010, and then it says do not sign after August 15th, 2010, which is 1 year, 1 day. That's the other. So it's make sure your calculations are correct when you do that. But actually the template here is really designed that if you have the word system, you can just type in those dates and all set. And the form date, actually the suggestion for the form date is put in a Word print date field. And then when you create the PDF, it's stamped with that date. And whatever date you make the PDF that has that date on it, and that's what you get the investigator.
There's something that's done because everybody doesn't use the same template, okay, it has to be done as part of the footer.
Yeah, the various things that you do, but that'll be. Well, part of the idea is that at least people would use the same signature blocks. I mean, number one is hopefully people would use similar templates. And this is designed to be one template that fits all. And that
What are your thoughts
and
about
at the minimum that the footer. What's it?
what are your thoughts about allowing investigators to use different?
In the end, as long as the information is there, I don't really care. I mean, I think from it's a little bit more work because you got to make sure everything is there, and I'd encourage them to take some of the boilerplate language and stick it in their template, so it's going to make life easier. But in the end, the requirements are it has to meet the regulatory requirements, not that it has to be in this form.
That's right.
And I think the signature block is very much policy issue, because some of the things in those signature blocks are not on the sponsors protocols because they may have different requirements for LARs and witnessing and all that sort of stuff. But that's why the signature block are actually on separate pages so they can be slapped onto a final page. But you could, one of the things, if you got Word forms, cut and paste, put signature block on. So this is what we're approving. You don't like it? Come back. So there's something like that you could do as well. I mean, the message I would have to investigators is that if you want to reduce the likelihood of being deferred, I'd recommend using the consent template. But in the end, here's the rules.
Right.
That's the HRP 311 consent form requirements. If you follow that, we will accept the consent template.
We
So-
allow them to do that now.
What's it? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, so, I'll tell you the time that it's really important is when you get, I don't know, oh, actually, you're the VA, you review for the VA record. I mean, you're gonna have, there's just stupid times when, like, the VA's gotta review it, and you have to review it, and they've got their template, and you have your template, and you end up, what you don't wanna end up is where somebody's gotta have somebody sign 2 consent forms, because there's no agreement on what has to be in the consent form, which occasionally I've had to do because people want exculpatory language in their consent forms, but that's another story. So post-review, anyways, going on with that. You calculate the review intervals, then automatically. Stamp the consent documents, that would be part of this. You would refer to the communication of review results and send applicable letters. This could be driven in part automatically, though I think in part you may need to drive some of this by the analysts figuring out what needs to be done, especially because they're going to need to look at letters, and there may be unanticipated problems. They may need to generate an external letter, or they may not need to generate an external letter. So that would be.
You're talking external letter.
An external letter is a letter to OHP,
No,
FDA.
the analysts aren't doing that.
Okay. So, but then that would need to be part of this, because that's this thing. I mean, in a sense, some of the external, they could draft the external letter, give it to you to sign, and but each of the now, just sort of the way these work, and I don't know how this is going to fit in the workflow, is look at the approval of research template. Okay, so everything in brackets are essentially merge fields, and I'm sure you got merge fields. Okay. The table actually here for the title review, project title, and so on is actually right out of minutes. So I would say either hopefully there's some mechanism to populate that automatically as well as populate the minutes. Approval dates, start dates, and so on.
Yes.
So a lot of this could be done. And then essentially once the merge things are there, then there's sincerely IRB manager. I don't know how if they're just sort of sent from the analyst. I mean, it's really up to you what they do. But the idea is that whoever's sending it out, it's under their signature. And in addition, the person sending out the letter is going to have some mechanism to choose how to CC letters. And these are all the people they need to think about CCing letters and when they have to CC letters. Those people. So there's also very little in the SOPs or the checklist or anything that says, like that you see in other policies that says if it's VA research, you got to let the VA R&D committee know because it's in the template letter and it's linked to that. So that would be another thing maybe to think about how to implement a system to work. They would check off who needs to be CC'd, and there might be reminders. Check this when. It's Navy research. Tell Marianne. And some of them.
Draft. We draft a letter and send it to the investigator in the system. So there is a CC list. Is there a CC list?
CC list, but only for the research team, not for anyone external.
Can you pull them?
A letter?
Just go into your administrator.
Just site administration.
Say again?
Just go to site administration to the template letters.
I'm in checklist as well.
an approval letter for a full board.
Full board?
Right, explains.
And
They're
that's
really, they should be the
anything.
same. I mean, in a sense, that's.
This is one for you, it's got VA language. So, what study number, designation, approval is valid from Dr. PI.
The merge codes are Word.
Yes,
They're standard Word merge codes, so you
Yeah.
can do an if then.
yes.
Okay, so you're all set. Okay.
We have many letters.
Okay, and
They
there's
just choose a letter. And if they need to add additional language, that type of thing.
Okay. So, one letter I want to point out is the external report letter, which is about 30 pages long. 10 pages. This time I'm going to remember the number of the PDF pages. Sequentially. So. Sorry. It's after
Request for agency approval.
yeah, I think it's after the School of Research. It's towards the
Application and terms of approval.
It's after, it's after that.
okay. If this is the template letter post approval, it's about that. So if you're at we're at the beginning of the post approval template letter, which is after the general.
Section, closure, table, external, loss.
That's right after external report. Okay, start to go forward from here.
Way past. It's further to the front.
Goes further. Sorry.
Keep going, it's in here. Next one. Next. Keep going.
Keep going. There it is. Okay, that's it. My apologies. Here, now we got to find mine.
There are things called tabs
No, I
at the
actually,
dollar store.
you don't want any tabs. No, you got to. If I put a sequential page number on there, that would have been So the external report is a report that you're going to use to send to FDA, RTP, VA, blah blah blah. You don't.
And we're not saying a lot. And we're not saying a lot. We're not saying a lot in the letter.
No. Basically what the letter does, the letter follows the OHP guidance on how to report. It's like the name of the organization is fulfilling this because blah. What this is a blah. Person conducting the research is this, reports in regard to, and so on. Now this one is probably, I don't know who signs the letters, but this is one
Me.
okay, so it'd be signed by you.
We have
But this one clearly requires, that when you get to the description of the problem, the actions taken, and the follow-up plans, you get into the beginning of the letter. But at least recommend putting it that way. So that might be enough. That's going to be another letter that's going to come up at times that needs to be filled out. And that's really that's at that point you're either in a state where you have approved the research, approved it with modifications, or closed it, and it just sits in a queue until waiting to come back with the revised information. in-depth work. Does that make sense? Okay. If you do committee review, oh sure. Yeah.
Dr. Cooper, I do have a question. I had an opportunity to look through your letters after you told me they had to be in the system by today. I didn't see any, I didn't see any letters. I didn't see any fields. And the reason I'm asking is because we have a certain project that's going on now that requires us to put the list of approved documents.
That's in there.
It is. Did I
Yeah.
miss that?
Yeah. I
Which one is
actually, it's in the if you look in the approval letter, it's part of that table.
Oh, documents reviewed.
It's part of the table of documents reviewed.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And
I know what it's talking about. Yeah.
yeah, and actually, I noticed you don't have that in your minutes, and I recommend putting it in your minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the template that I had before did not have, I must have pulled another, I pulled it off
Oh,
one of
interesting.
our toolkits, and it,
Okay.
because I noticed this
Two-
yesterday, and I was
Two
like,
versions
oh.
floating around.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I will add that.
I thought I had your.
Yeah, we didn't have,
Okay.
Is there
What's that?
a way for Cicero to pull the initial application materials and list them?
Yes. With the exception of the consent form.
Fine. But everything else it can pull into the letter
Yes.
and put it there automatically?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, we've already solved that problem.
And what do we,
The problem we weren't able to solve is the issue with consent forms because of the process that we
so it is currently pulling it in?
No, it is not. Okay, it's in development. It is. Okay,
Okay.
in testing it does.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, well, you can. I mean, I guess worst comes to worst, you can add it to letter name,
That's what we're trying not to do.
which is
Yeah.
separate thing, but,
Right.
Yeah.
yeah. Or have. I mean, I guess the other would be because generally you're going to have like a adult consent document, a child, or whatever. You may have 2 or 3 sort of typical consent documents, and you could just put in you could check it off and automatically populate it. So, I'm trying to think. You should get. Boy, I love this design stuff. I'm gonna go back to GW and get my computer science.
Do that one.
What's that?
Get working on that.
Yeah. While I'm knitting Afghans,
Yeah.
raising my 5 children, doting on my wife, the thoracic surgeon. It's an old Kathy guy sweatshirt.
Yeah.
I just missed that because I was looking
I'm
for
writing my
fields.
novel.
for
That's why I missed it. That's the end of
Your
it.
memoir.
My novel. No, my thriller novel that's going to.
Well, the consents are fine. I mean, if they can manually insert them, but if it pulls everything else in, that's a help, right? You know, it's a help getting.
Oh yeah, we solved that a couple of months ago. To do
But it's
that.
not in production.
No, because we're continuing to test because the consent forms were the hang-up. The consent
Right.
forms aren't approved until the very last thing,
Okay.
until after the study. But that's a technical issue. We're still working on it.
So for convene review, so if you click convene review, it goes to IRB committee preparation, which is 854-040.
What was the number again?
040.
040, Susan. So what this is confirming what members are going to be present at the meeting. Consult the roster to be aware of experience and expertise. Review all submissions placed on the agenda and prepare an agenda. Assign primary reviewer, assign a scientific scholarly reviewer. They can be the same person. Use the worksheet, evaluation of quorum, and expertise that I went over yesterday to make sure the meeting will be appropriately convened. If not, take steps to change who's going to be there. And then if look through anything, if you see things where you need consultation, proactively get consultation for the protocol, or if somebody contacts you that you need consultation to arrange that. And then prepare reviewer materials, which again will not be any reviewer materials. So I'll talk about how to, I mean, basically clearly it's going to be the easy part is getting the materials to people. The easy part is also making sure that and the hard part, one of the hard parts is going to be training IRB members to review the stuff on the worksheet for review materials, because that's an expectation. It's not a, you're not going to send it to them, but they're expected to do that. And again, it's going to, when they look at Click, there's going to be a lot of stuff to review. They don't need to review all the documents, but they need to review the documents on a list unless they're a primary reviewer. So you're not going to deliver things. And oh, I think there's a letter that gets sent to people, but you probably have some email system to send people emails, and you don't have to put review materials in the thing. So So currently, if you're preparing for a meeting, what's on that web screen? You must. My guess is there's something you set up. You associate members with a meeting.
Yes. And
So you do that.
we send them a request.
You assign primary reviewers.
Yeah.
Imagine you do that. So you just need a way to assign scientific reviewers as well. And then, and you should be checking quorum of that. And
No problem.
okay. All
Go ahead, come with it.
right. Sorry.
What?
We don't-
What are we checking?
So went to
This is beta.
one of the manager
Yeah,
went
patch the other
to
day.
so went to the managers. And
They start.
the IO at this institution with their IO and it pulls up the catch. That's what conferences. Even he said, she said, you make it your opinion on how we used to be our actions, but we have. Anyway, so it's just like, I thought that was okay, but I think, a lot of this is automated. I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't think it'll be a big change from what you heard.
All right, so just to humor me, in like 4 minutes or less,
Meeting
start to
cycle?
finish. Yeah.
Meeting cycle, starting with the incoming protocol or how we're assigning to, so protocol comes in, it's assigned to committee review. From there, we will.
And it's now when it's assigned to committee review, it automatically gets back in the peer review step is where we're going to assign to full committee review, and at that point, it's going to automatically pick some meeting and put it on that meeting.
Okay. And then in Cicero, we have a function that's for RSVP for a meeting. So we send out an RSVP to all the attendees who are expected, and they will confirm their attendance in Cicero. Based on that, we know who is attending the IRB meeting, and then we'll go through each item that's assigned to the particular agenda. For example, today's 826, and we will assign a primary and secondary, if necessary, reviewer to each of those transactions. They get an email notification in Cicero, and we also send one to all of the reviewers, to all of the IRB, outside and Outlook, just to let them know what was assigned. And once we have assigned them in Cicero, they can then begin their review and complete the checklist as applicable for each transaction. I think I covered everything.
I'm just a thing I'm curious about. So how far in advance are the meetings scheduled?
Do we?
I'm just
Do
curious.
you
How
guys-
far-
Meeting space.
No, I mean,
Meetings are
like meeting
scheduled
dates
through
are
the end of the
set
year.
up like
For
a
a
year
year.
from now.
Forever.
Okay.
Mhm.
And how far out do you set up who's going to be at the meeting, or do you have fixed rosters? Is that you? So okay.
So the RSVP goes out a month ahead.
Okay.
And
Because
we have
for the alternates.
Okay.
we have a schedule for each of our panels, so we know who's expected at each meeting.
Okay. I'm just curious. Is everybody pretty much an alternate in every other IRB meeting?
A majority of them.
Majority
yeah,
of
for the most part, I'd
Okay.
say.
I mean, okay. So you okay. And okay. It's sort of the things I'm thinking. I'm just sort of thinking just how this fits in with the process, but that you could.
Isn't there a list of the meeting panel and the members that are assigned to that panel?
Yeah, that's the
full attendees.
So those are the individuals who confirmed when we sent out an RSVP saying, yes, I will attend.
So we're in beta right now, so beta was passed 2 days ago, so this was as of Tuesday.
Okay. So, I was just thinking that this is just sort of another issue that you have and how to solve the issue, and that is to, and I don't know, I mean, I guess on average, your RVs have like 15 people, 18
Members?
members on a committee.
This one's
Probably.
17, so one was 9.
I'd say on
How many people usually show up?
Here's 15 confirmed.
Oh, 15 confirmed, wow,
Mhm.
okay.
Scroll down a little bit, Dennis, so you can show,
Yeah.
see
I
what
don't
you've
know.
logged, and then,
What I'm trying to think of is how to, I mean, the question is how to have fewer people at a meeting, but keep the RV sizes the same by having more alternates.
Mhm.
But by then I mean, in other words, the full membership might be 9,
Right.
but who's ever on the IRB now as a full member just becomes an alternate. But it's really arbitrary, and then it's kind of like, you know, if you just make sure that at least 9 people are there, but then the problem you have is that a person and their alternate is there, and then what do you do? And then, but actually, what you could also have all of them attend the meeting, but each one responsible for half the agenda. You know, I'm just sort of thinking how to do workload stuff. and
Yeah.
things like that.
Julie and I discussed
That's an interesting bit.
at 2 meetings simultaneously. And
No. Have 5 people on the committee. Everybody else alternates. And then basically, if you have 20 items on the agenda, just have every item assigned to 5 people. Might be a lot of work, but I'm just saying, you're going to run into issues of workload. I can just tell you with the volume, and especially, well, with the IRB, yes, really, you're right. I'm just anticipating and trying to figure out a solution to this.
Thank God
Because you're going to hear something else I'm going to say that you're not going to like. So, okay.
yes,
Well, here's
we are
one-
having issues
okay.
with workload,
Okay.
my friend. We
Okay.
are.
Yeah.
Not going
But
to.
work
We are.
this is for the IRB.
We are
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
issues. Yeah.
So, so it's sort of like saying,
I'm
It's-
leaning towards the split the committee in half, have
Okay.
meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
okay, yeah, no, that's one. I'm just,
Blah
yeah,
blah blah.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
we're not.
I
We gotta straighten this out first.
I just, everybody pushes back on this, but I'll tell you, the IRB members won't like this. But I'll just tell you that if you want to just do an experiment, get 5 people who want to have an IRB meeting, just 5 people, and they all agree that all of them will review everything on the agenda except only the primary reviewer is going to review like the investigation brochure and the brief and the full protocol, or they're going to read the whole thing. Everybody else reads the protocol relevant, either the template protocol or the protocol relevant to the criteria. They read the application form, they read the consent document, they read the recruitment table, and they do all that stuff. And get them in a room and see how the reviews change. Because if I'm going to guess, but a lot of IRBs, I watched what the IRB does, and basically the primary reviewer says, I thought this, I thought that, I thought this, and this, and this, and this, and it goes great, and it goes on. And the meeting sounds familiar. And unfortunately what's going on is it's expedited review by committee. It's one person's reviewing it, and everybody's going, yeah, amen, brother, go ahead, we trust you. And people are probably saying, right, that, the agenda is this big, and I can't read, I can't read 3,000 pages, or 6,000 or 18,000 pages. So people aren't reviewing that much. But if you get 5 people in the room who've all reviewed it, 3 or 4 people who will say, ooh, ah. And if it helps Bruce, it's like that's the thing that picks up sort of the little things that maybe the IRB missed on that one issue. So that's what the you're just going to get a better review, and it doesn't really matter that the protocol's about gliomas and there's no brain tumor specialist in the room. I mean, you can get a brain tumor specialist in the room if you need to, but they're not the IRB member. And so if you can do that, I think you'll be a lot better off. And you don't even have to split the committees in 2. It's just you sort of have the same committee, but just half the members are primaries for one and primary for the other. Or they can be the same committee, but you just choose different people at different times. But if you get 5 people in the room reviewing everything, that works out well. So in terms of one of the things I mentioned, the workflows, is a primary reviewer and a secondary reviewer. And I would recommend it's almost like operationally what I'm going to recommend is to pick 5 primary reviewers. Is really what you're doing. But we're not going to do that. The role of the primary reviewer is to read the stuff that not everybody has to review. It's the investigative brochure and the grant and the entire protocol, just to make sure that the investigator didn't have something hidden that they didn't tell the RD members about. And are you going to do the template protocol thing?
Mhm.
Okay. So let me go. If you go to the template protocol, let me just show you this. What do investigators submit? This is. This is like the 3rd document. It's after the minutes and after the template consent. And the templates in the beginning. So the key things here are, that you tell the investigator, prepare a document in the following section, and you just be upfront. Depending upon the nature of the research, certain sections may not be applicable. Just indicate this is appropriate. So if they're not getting consent, they write down NA. I'm not getting consent, or something like that. If it's a not human research thing, and they just think, it's just not relevant, just write not relevant. They just want to, if this is a guide, it's not that you have to fill out everything for every protocol. Use your head. For any items described in the sponsor protocol or other documents submitted with the application, you may reference the title and page numbers of these documents. If you reference page numbers, I have attached those page numbers to the protocol and limit attached pages to those referenced. So because you're electronic, you can take out that last 2 sentences. Basically what you're going to say is, when you get to objectives, I don't want you cut and paste in the protocol. I just want you to tell me what page the IRB members can find the objectives on. When you get to, inclusion exclusion criteria, I don't want a copy. I want you to just refer to that. And what you're going to tell the IRB members is, you have to review this. And if it refers to the protocol, that's what you review. That's what everybody needs to do. The primary reviewer, you want to go through the whole thing. Why? Because maybe there's selection criteria that the investigator didn't point out. That's really what we're doing. Why did they review the investigative brochure? Because maybe there's a risk in the investigative brochure that the IRB should know about that are not listed in the protocol. It is a consistency issue, not a review issue.
Am I hearing you, this is titled protocol title.
Right.
So this is the protocol. This is not the application.
I call this the investigator protocol as opposed to the sponsor protocol. It's the term I use, that's all. And it's the term that's used in the SOPs.
Mhm.
Maybe this should be the title. And the document is called the protocol template because it's the template that's used to make the investigative protocol. So this is
But you're not having them fill this out if they have a sponsor's protocol.
no. If they have a sponsored protocol, they fill this out.
Oh, they do that.
Yeah. There's 2 issues. If you got a 300-page sponsored protocol, this tells the IRB members the 20 pages they need to read. Okay. I mean, certainly, if you've done you do audits. I like to find the data safety monitoring plan in the protocol. Sometimes it's a lot of work, and it'd be a lot nicer if somebody said, "See page 38, done. See page 215, see page 1473, volume 2." So this is really, and part of this is to say to the investigators. I mean, my message to investigators is, look, it's a pain in the butt to sit down at Cicero and write all this stuff down. If you want to do it, it's your option now. But to give you an easier option, I want to give you this. Now, I don't want you cutting and pasting, but these protocols are pretty long, and the IRB only needs to review a fraction of it. So what I'm doing is just tell the IRB the page numbers. I need you to do that work. In exchange for that, I won't make you cut and paste. That's really what it is, and it's like and the IRB member and the IRB members will find what you want, you know, that you should be able to point out where these things are. So that will, this then prevents the, you know, because the issue with the IRB members is they're going to say, this is a huge stack of protocols, and I'm saying, you don't have to read the whole protocol. You got to read this and the reference pages. If this doesn't reference pages, just read this. The second thing is that I would say to investigators and to IRB members and everybody else is, look, I know that there are things that we're asking for in here. They're just not in your sponsor protocol. Okay. How you maintain confidentiality of the data at your site is about how you maintain confidentiality of your site. It's not in the sponsor protocol. How you do consent is about how you do consent. How you do recruitment is not mentioned in the sponsor protocol. So those things, I need you to write down what you do. If they happen to be in a sponsor protocol, you can reference it. But it's like the basic idea is we need the information, and we need it in a way. I need you to help us to do it in a way that does not overly burden the IRB members. And I know it's a little bit of extra work for you, but I'm asking that so that the IRB members can get the information they need. And in exchange for filling out a 50-page web page application form. And then this gets uploaded. Is that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what Dennis and I got done. So we'll look at that this afternoon.
I mean, you could do this electronically if you want. I mean, but again, I think the issue is that I'm not sure, you know, from the IRB members' perspective, from an automation perspective, it doesn't give you a lot. And I do think this is the kind of document that you're going to find, you know, we're not really asking this question right that people understand it. Let's just change it. And if it's in a Word document, it's going to be a lot easier to come to Dennis to write the code out.
Well, changing wording of questions is
Okay.
not
So it's I mean, whatever. It's just if it's not, then
I mean,
yeah. But that's the basic idea.
I'm just thinking about IRB members. They're not looking at a Word document now and going back. They're looking electronically at the information in front of them electronically and looking in the attached full protocol update. So
Yes.
I'm just.
I can solve that pretty easily. After I show you what
Okay.
I've done.
Okay.
All right,
I can
we'll
solve
look
So-
at this
I
after.
I mean,
can solve this easily.
This could be electronic, but I would definitely the idea is to give the message to the investigator that we're trying to cut back your work a lot. We still need a little bit more from you than just handing us a sponsor.
So if they don't have a sponsored protocol, what do you?
Fill out.
Right.
Fill out. And again, I'm not like the consent document. I'm not. I don't want to be. I wouldn't want to be obsessive compulsive about this. It's like if you have a protocol that you've written and all this stuff is on here, I'm not going to really make a big deal that it's in a different order, you know, different type font. I don't really care. It just has to have the information. If you want to be sure that you've got all the information, the suggestion is use this format, or at least check this format against what you have. So it's getting the information is the goal. So why did I do that? Because we were talking about. Oh, so that's so the material. So the message to IRB members is everybody's got to review this and all reference pages, the consent document, recruitment materials, and that's about it. They do not need to. They actually do not need to review what I would call the application form, like what the grant is funding and who the co-investigators are and things like that. I mean that they really don't have to review, but they got to review this. And so your trick is how to rearrange things so that you'll get that done and you won't have people quit the IRB. Well, that might be, like I said, people who never show up, never talk about it. So, the,
On IRB meeting prep.
yeah, I think that is. I'm doing okay.
I'm waiting for her to go.
Oh,
Lost your food on?
no, 13 minutes. Okay, if there's anything else.
Go ahead,
Okay, so
go
yeah,
ahead.
so that's already meeting
Because
prep.
we're special
Yeah,
issues
go ahead.
today.
Go ahead.
We're going to talk about IRB meeting conduct, which is not automated.
Okay.
So IRB meeting conduct is the next one, HRP 041.
are your thoughts about the IRB meeting?
Ooh,
I can do that.
at 1
Who's
o'clock.
chair?
At 1 o'clock, sound good. I actually wanted to go up at 1 because it was
All right. 1 o'clock. Okay, good. Can we do that?
Yes. So the IRB meeting conduct, this is a process for the IRB chair. And now you gotta have cooperative chairs because you want to be able to ask the chair, I want you to bring this to the meeting and I want you to follow it. Refer off this. If you don't like the format, we'll change it into a worksheet format. And we'll say follow the conduct of the meeting worksheet. But basically, this is what they gotta do. So the important things are, obviously, they're gonna call the meeting to order. Then they're going to ask IRB members whether anyone has a conflicting interest in any item on the agenda. So this is a reminder. It's still IRB members' responsibility, but this is a reminder of that responsibility. So now they're going to there's a parallel process here called on the convener. Where'd it go? So there's during the meeting, the IRB staff are going to have a copy of the evaluation of quorum and expertise, and just as people enter and leave, make sure the quorum is there, and if not, notify the chair. And if so, you're going to take the action called table. Table means, the way we're going to use tabling, tabling means we can't review the research because of things that are not related to the investigator. In other words, the IRB loses quorum and run out of time, that's table. Everything else is a deferral. So if the investigator didn't submit the right information, you don't table, you defer or disapprove. If there are IRB members with conflicting interests, the chair is to ask them to leave. Or first ask the members if you have any questions for these people. If not, please leave, then go in the meeting. If there's a consultant present, you would ask the consultant for information at this point. If there's any written information from the consultant, the IRB gets it, if they haven't gotten it before. There is now the difference actually would be that you would assign a scientific reviewer and a scholarly scientific reviewer and a primary reviewer. The role of the scientific reviewer, they are the guru about the science. They're the person who checks the validity of the research. They say the investigator left out this risk. They say that they're using angiography. They could get the same data with ultrasound. They're not going to get, they're not going to get the results because they're using flawed methods or something. Or the investigator is greatly overstating the importance of the research, whatever. Or they say the research is accurate. And they can also be there for the IRB to ask questions. Then the primary reviewer would lead the IRB through the use of the checklist. I don't know how you do this now, but what I teach IRBs to do is when I start out, I say go over every item. Just go through it. It takes time. Just get in the habit of going over it. But what I think the ideal is to say is the primary reviewer says, I had problems with equitable selection and undue influence, those two issues. What did everybody else have problems with? And someone says, well, I had problems with the consent document here. I had problems with minimization of risks. Fine, let's discuss those. And then we either agree or disagree, and we make a motion to a vote. But if there's but that's the basic process. Starting out by sort of compulsively using the sheet, and then as everybody gets used to using it. In fact, one of the things I like to do is you may want to consider is giving people the sheet in paper for starters for training. Make everybody fill out the sheet and turn it in, or at the end of the meeting, so you can see who's filling it out, who's not. To just sort of push people to do it. We like that everybody's going. Anyways, consultants can do that. So if you want, I'll be happy to do that. If there's new information, there's a worksheet, new information to consider actions to take. There should be I like the idea of restating the consensus regarding any protocol-specific findings. This is really the number one trick as to how to not have to record minutes and do minutes so that at the end of the meeting you're done. And that is you have to make sure that people are clear what are the changes that we wanted and why did we want them. And one of the ways to do that is to ask if they were taking minutes, can you read off the changes we requested and why we requested them. It's a little bit clunky, But if you start doing it, I mean, number one is if the minutes taker can't do that, it's very likely that people participating in the meeting can't do that either, and they don't know what they're voting on if they're voting on contingencies. They have no idea. So it's important. So that's a thing that I recommend doing. Somebody makes a motion, and you can maybe change the names of these things, but I'd recommend having stereotypic names for what you do. So if you either call it approve or call it approval, call it modifications required to secure approval, call it contingent modifications, call it what you want.
We're calling it
But-
what's here.
But use these definitions.
Mhm.
And make sure, and this is the thing for the minutes taker, these are the actions that go in the minutes. It's going to say either approve, modifications required to secure approval, deferral, or disapprove. That's it. If there's an approve, it's also going to say the period of approval and the level of risk. If it's so modifications required to secure approval, I have defined as when there's specific modifications such that a designated reviewer can determine whether an investigator has made the required changes without judging whether the change meets the regulatory criteria for approval. That's sort of the key thing. It's conceptually, everything that's in ORHP guidance is difficult to follow. And they do say whenever the IRB requests modifications or clarifications that are directly relevant to the regulatory criteria for approval, the IRB must defer the research. That's their language. And what it's really saying is you can't defer regulatory criteria for approval questions to the designated reviewer. So this is something just the chair is going to have to learn to do, and be able to say, you can't say, nobody's going to review, if you say you don't like the Data Safety Monitoring Committee and you need more information, we're not going to be able to, we're going to have to just defer this research. If you can tell me what changes you want in the Data Safety, you say, I want a statistician on the Data Safety Monitoring Committee, I want him to meet every 3 months, and I want him to do a t-test. Fine. That we can put in, and somebody can verify whether that's the case. But that's the big trick. You're going to need to also, this is the other thing I think for senior minutes, if there are contingent modifications that the staff have noted or things that the staff want changed or that the IRB says, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do those changes, they need to be in the contingencies. They need to be in the minutes. I noticed also, I think you do track changes for investigators. You change consents and you track changes, so this is the consent that we're, okay. So I think that's okay. We'll just go with that and make sure that consent is make sure that track changes is in the file. It's in the file.
Are we going to start doing that? Because right now, if we have a change for the consent form, we don't send them a track changes version. It's a standard.
What's the standard practice right now?
We will write a contingency saying, please change the consent form to state procedure XYZ, which is in the protocol.
Okay.
We don't send them a track changes
Okay,
version.
because I'll tell you what, what I'm saying is I saw in the minutes comments about a track changes consent document that was going to be sent to the investigator with the requested changes, and the minutes did not list specific changes. So maybe it was just a specific one at a meeting or something.
Maybe it was another,
This was Christina's.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
It's just not standard that we
right,
always
but I'll
send
tell
a
you,
track
if you do that, the one thing you have to be careful about is that everybody at the meeting knows what that is. You don't want one person saying, I edited the meeting. Oh, cool, you're a good editor. Yeah, people really need to know what was edited and agree with that. Defer and disapproval are basically the same thing, except whether you provide suggestions. But we talked about that. They're really the same. Then you open the floor for additional discussion. Review any modifications required by secure approval to ensure that the IRB staff has recorded them. And that's the thing part. One of the things, so this financial interest thing is important here. If a financial interest has not been evaluated yet, it may have to go back to the convened IRB whenever the person says, whenever the people review it and say there's something here that needs to be managed. If they say this is below our threshold for worrying about it, that's fine. But if there's any sort of management disclosure or anything, it needs to come back to the convened IRB, even if it's just a change in consent document. entertain a motion, call for a vote, re-invite the members of the conflicting interest back to the meeting, and make sure that any written information is provided to the staff. 5.4 should be deleted. That's a mistake. And that's basically it. So essentially this is, repeat for each item on the agenda and just go through. And I don't really have any process here for business items and other discussion. I mean, there's really no
Well, like,
SOP requirement for that.
like sometimes education, sometimes we do later, so we could put that in if we wanted to.
Yeah,
I mean,
I wouldn't
you know.
bother putting an SOP. You can do whatever. I mean, the SOP doesn't say you can't do anything else.
Mhm.
But I would just, I mean, this is the SOP. This is really, if you do education, that's education.
Right.
And you can put it in the minutes if you want or not. But that's really. Any questions?
No.
So I think one of the things operationally you're going to have to figure out is when you do checklists, when something like if you have pediatrics, everybody should be getting the child checklist. Everybody should be thinking about the child checklist. That's an IRB decision. There has to be either one copy of the checklist filled out, or the information in that checklist has to go into the minutes. And whichever, and I'm gonna, maybe to make sure the entire IRB is involved, I might recommend putting it in the minutes, and using the minutes template. But in those cases, those checklists are not filled out, and I'm, how you do that. You could just have Word documents that people have reference to. They could be electronic documents. That could be sentences, rather. But somewhere you're going to need some process to make sure that everybody is thinking about it and using it. And again, it's going to be a lot easier if it's 5 people rather than 18, 7, 15.
So each person around the table needs to have access to pediatric checklists.
Yeah, they need to be.
And
They
one
should be
copy-
considering it
Right.
while they're reviewing the documents before the meeting. I mean, ideally, you can have really quick meetings if, like, when you get to the child part, say, does everybody think this is category 2? Yeah. Okay. Because everybody's looked at it. They all agree. For some, I thought it was 3. Have a discussion. Controversial issue. But if everybody thinks it's 2, then you move on. And, is everybody comfortable with, every child is sensed? Yes. Okay. Is everybody comfortable with the investigator documenting consent? Is everybody comfortable with one parent? But basically everybody has decided, has sort of come up with some information about that on their own before the meeting. And so that if people disagree about what that should be, then they can have that discussion. I see a lot of sides.
Well, if we don't have to assign them to everyone, it shouldn't be.
No, that's not my issue. It's the
This
responsibility
is all
of doing-
behavior. It's
Yeah, well,
responsibility of
that's,
doing-
yeah,
I mean,
that's,
part of it
they're
is
big boys, girls.
Yeah.
They can take the,
part of it is what we're talking about is that the checklist, these relevant checklists. First of all, everybody should get and use a 311 checklist for every research program, everything on the agenda. Initial review, continued review, modifications, unanticipated problems, serious noncompliance, everything. They should have that, and they should consider it as they're reviewing the information before the meeting. And the pressure that people should give, the pressure publicly the chairs can put on them and say, I want you to review that and come to the meetings with the things that are issues. I don't want you to come into the meeting and just listen to what everybody else says and what they thought. Think about it yourself. And then, but the same is true actually with the subpart checklist and the waivers. And that people should come to the meeting with their sense of what category it is, how a consent should be done, assent, and whether things are met and the reasons why. And then the ideal, and this takes time, would be that at the meeting that the primary reviewer might say, I thought this is minimal risk because of that, or something, or why did people think this is minimal risk, and then the minutes taker documents that in the minutes. I thought this held out a prospective direct benefit for each individual child. Why? And really go through those things and have a discussion and put them down. And that's sort of the key thing. And so in the end, those minutes don't get filled out. but you do want them reviewed, and you want some mechanism so that when people come to the meeting, they have, if
You
they
mean
wrote
the
notes or something
checklist
on them,
of
they
it.
would do it. I mean, in a way, I know. I don't know. I mean, in a sense, paper is really nice because they can just scribble their notes, scribble their checklist, bring those notes to the meeting. But if there's an electronic way to do that, that would be the way to do it. But you really want people to have used them, made notes, that okay, everything. I don't care how they fill it out, just that they've used them and consider them. And if they have any notes, they've written them down. So so part of this is the bigger challenge is getting the IRB behavior in line, and the smaller challenge is then, what mechanism do you want to use in an electronic system to kind of have everybody use the checklist but not have them recorded permanently in the records. And so after an IRB meeting is post review, and it is the exact same SOP we just reviewed. So post review is no different post continuing review than it is post another review. And I was actually going to ask Dennis if Click does sub processes so that doesn't need to be repeated. A sub process is workflow system would mean that he would reuse the same. So he'd take these screens for SOP for post review, and it would plug into the workflow for convenient review, and it plug into the workflow for expedited review. And if you changed one, both would change. So if you need to make a change to one screen, the other change would be the same. The underlying code is the same. They would just be referenced by two different workflows, so that you don't have two things to edit. And real workflow management systems do that better. So that would be something else.
He's upstairs setting up for the meeting.
Okay.
He'll be back.
Anyways, other than some of the side things, we can talk a bit about minutes, and I presented conflicts of interest yesterday. This is the guts of what goes on. There are a lot of other SOPs here. There are more things around the fringes, but this is the key thing to understand. All the other things are a little bit simpler. So, any questions on that? How this all fits?
No, I mean, it seems like, it is going to be different in process as far as what we're doing now, but essentially it's this. My questions are more of how we're going to execute this in Cicero, which I know it's going to be worked out. But as far as completing checklists, having the worksheets available for reference, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That part.
And I think the expedited review is the easier part because it's you guys or people who are just sitting at the computer filling it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that usually makes it easy. But I think I got a few IRBs that have the IRB fill out the form online, which you could do if you want. And it's just, that would be another option if you wanted to. But the trick is not to have to fill out, not for every reviewer needs to use the form, but don't want to record it.
You're talking about the worksheet criteria for approval and additional considerations.
Yes, and all related. So in other words, if you do a short form, you got to get the short form worksheet. If you do children's, you get the children's checklist and so on.
And are the checklists completed by the primary reviewer, or
They are. The
do you have
checklist should be
everybody complete a
used.
checklist?
The checklist should be used by everybody.
So
No,
you have everybody
I
in the room fill out a checklist for research involving non-viable mandates.
They don't need to fill out the checklist. I want them to look at it, and I want them to come to the meeting and be prepared to say, I think everything in the checklist is met, or I have issues with these things, and I want them to be able to, with the committee, articulate reasons why things are met.
So use it more like a worksheet.
Correct. For convenient review, it's more like a worksheet. And ideally, the IRB should fill out the checklist. And admittedly, goes, we're going to spend a lot of time in meetings. Yes. The pediatric stuff is especially hard because there's a lot of things to sit down and document. But at least for starters, I'd almost rather have it start, say, look, we're doing it this way. It's a little clunky and it's a little slow, but we need to get in the habit of doing it. And over time, if we're able to figure out a different way to do this, it makes it work faster, that's fine.
Do we have any research involving children protocols going today?
Yes.
Good.
I want to just point out another thing. You know, one of the interesting, the thing about these SOPs, if you know, like, you know, we threw everything together in a simple process. There's no, but if you look at most people's SOPs, they got SOPs for initial review, continued review, modifications, adverse events, devices, drugs, blah, blah, blah. So what I want to do is just, we're not going to have a chance to go through section C, but I want to sort of point out how to use it. So a number of people here should be familiar with this, at least to use it so that when AHARP comes around and they say, how do you do devices, for example, you can say, here's how we do it. And so if you go to page 21 in section C, to 170. So the AHARP requirements are on the left. So policies and procedures describe the legal and regulatory requirements that apply to the use of investigational test articles. Policies and procedures describe the process the organization uses to confirm that test articles have appropriate regulatory approvals such as clinical trial certificate or an IND, IDE that meet exemption requirements for such approvals. So here it says, on the other side, look at the SOP for peer review. So we say we take the SOP for peer review. On the back of it there, it says, in the review of application materials, it's got the check for the drugs and devices. If there is a drug and device, they complete the checklist for things. Where is it? Somewhere here. Oh. Peer review, checklist, peer review.
Down here,
Worksheet drugs.
Worksheet drugs. Okay, yeah. So the worksheet drugs, anyway, so can't remember right, but basically, the idea is that sheet uses references to worksheet drugs. You go to the worksheet drugs, it has the regulatory criteria. The staff use that to determine that the regulatory criteria met. I know it is. I made it in numerical order, and the and those will come up as contingencies if an IND or IDE is needed, that they're there before it gets approved. And that's sort of and so part of it is all the documents that are affected are here. But what you want to be able to do is sort of put it in your head to be able to say, this is where all the pieces are taken care of. And so on. So that's the that's sort of the key issue when AHARP comes, and there's how do you handle suspensions, terminations, and stuff. So basically, all the relevant documents and sections are listed in this section C, and you probably don't need to be as detailed as I am, because you could probably say, well, they would take care of that on the drug device sheet. You know, that's where we that's the guts of that. But it's really sort of knowing how everything fits together. Certain things require you to use other things, which require you to use other things, which require you to use other things, which make you fill out things, which mean that this happens and this happens, so that you can do those sorts of things.
This is an AHARP reviewer. It's going to be a lot.
And these are not currently hyperlinked?
They're not hyperlinked.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
Oh, you're going to do that? Oh, my goodness. Well, this is the one thing that I can give you the PDF. I mean, essentially, we have a piece of software that you can use that will that converts it into a bookmark PDF. And but it does not.
Julie's a master of hyperlinking.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we have that.
Now the reason there, I don't know. I wonder if I can add my piece of code to.
Then as an AHARP reviewer,
What's that?
you know, when
Oh yeah. Oh, we're looking through it.
I get one
You want
more,
to make it easy?
yeah. One, yeah, well,
I never use the hyperlinks. That's why I'm accepting.
Really?
Not even practical, even through our recipe,
Yeah, we have
it's helpful. And we're not flipping.
Yeah, it's interesting. I might be able to do it automatically.
If you don't have software to do it, develop it.
Yeah, yeah. No, that would be sort of cool. Next time I have a couple of hours free. No, because I actually I wrote this software that does this, and it actually, as it's going through, creates a list of all the bookmarks, and it adds the bookmarks programmatically into Adobe. But it actually may not be. I have to see. I'll have to look.
Okay.
I mean, but the bookmarks are. It is bookmarks. I mean, I don't think. I know AHRP's not going to care when they get the application.
No.
In terms of that.
No.
But,
They just want that OCR.
OCR.
Optical.
Yeah.
Something.
Optical character recognition.
Yes.
In terms of.
Being able to search the document.
Oh, there's nothing scanned in here. Everything is.
That's for all the
full
additional
text.
stuff we scan. That's for all the additional stuff we scan.
Yeah, you're not going to scan anything.
We're not scanning anything. Oh, good. It's done. The application is done.
Yeah, you need to.
Yeah, right.
You may need to substitute.
The
click
application
forms
is
and things like
99% completed.
that. But I would, if you have a click form, I would take the click form, and I would PDF the page of the click form, and then put it into, and then substitute it for the form in the application form.
All right, so change of plans for this afternoon. Everybody is relieved except Cynthia, me, Sue.
Oh, do you,
But that just
You
means
won't know.
Anne and Mary are you're excused for the afternoon, I think.
do you want me to go over to, in the
Yes.
afternoon you want to go over the
Well,
rest
let me-
of the stuff?
Well,
Because I wanted to go through the other workflows that I have.
well, what are you gonna? What do we need to
Oh,
see?
that's the committee.
It'll be
You want to do the whole thing?
no. But I'm looking at lunch for you.
No. I haven't gone through everything. So.
Okay.
But I went through the big part. But I wanted to sort of cover most
Sure.
of the other.
I just didn't know. I didn't know how strict you are with your time. Your timing for lunch.
Oh no, I'm not. Usually my alarm starts going off at 11:45, and I usually get to lunch about 1:30.
Okay. All right then.
Just one more thing.
Okay.
So
I'm just trying to keep you.
it's not like I'm gonna pass out. So you want me to continue? on?
Yes.
So next thing-
Nobody's excused. Stay.
Let's go to modifications required to secure approval, which is SOP 022. This is about the simplest SOP in the whole thing. So with modifications required to secure approval, the investigator is going to fill out a form. That's it. Lunch. The investigator is going to fill out a form, modifications required to secure approval, which basically says, what did you do, and submit all your change documents. And then basically the investigator is going to request, or if they, the issue is if they look at the stuff and they say, I don't want to do this, and I want this to go to the committee RD for appeal, then they can do that. Otherwise, they follow the non-committee review preparation, which takes you back to going through a designated reviewer. One of the options for designated reviewers is to say that modification, they're going to go through, look at it, and then they're going to just click off again, change it from, select a level of review, fill out the checklist, and put everything in. Does that make sense? It just filters back to it. So another one is emergency use of a test article, which is 023. So the policy, I think that's your policy, whenever possible, investigators are to notify the IRB of a proposed emergency use of a test article in a life-threatening situation in advance of the use, understanding it's not always possible. And a designated reviewer does this. Not that that's absolutely required, but it's just in a sense, the designated reviewer are the regulatory people. You get your reviewers, you understand the regs, you know exemptions, you know expedited, you know emergency use, you know your knowledgeable people. So it's just a level. So if there's proposed emergency use of a test article in a life-threatening situation, talk with the investigator and use the worksheet to determine whether the circumstances meet the regulatory criteria. And even if you're doing this is what you say, and the investigator says it's not a life-threatening situation, or I don't have an IND, or you know whatever. If they tell you you know there is time for IRB review, I just don't want to do that anyway, then basically your comment to them is if you proceed with this, it will be a violation of federal regulations. I'm not telling you can't do it. I'm just going to make it clear it's not in compliance. That's serious. But that's really the message. Otherwise, you say, from everything you've told me, this meets the criteria. You know, go ahead. And if it's a post review, then what you're going to do is take the information that you have and go over and see whether it met the criteria. If it met the criteria, essentially you're going to give an acknowledgement, and if it doesn't meet the criteria, you're going to, which is the next SOP, you're going to treat it as non-compliance. And so the worksheet, back here, the worksheets.
Well, 317.
So the work, it's pretty, you know, it's unfortunately because the regs are kind of weird, but it's pretty straightforward, one page. You just got to take them through. The consent gets complicated. But essentially, it's really just going over with them this stuff. And again, what you just want verbal attestation that these things are true. There is one here, the research is not subject to HHS regulation, which is just before the consent section. That's going to be your determination. Essentially, this is the investigator who says it's an emergency. I have to enroll them in this double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, and you go, no, that's research as defined by HHS. You cannot do that. So that's really what that is. But most of the other things there are you just asking the question to say, is there a standard treatment that's available? If they say yes, you say, in that case, it doesn't meet the regulatory requirements allowing use, and so on. Okay. So the emergency use of a test article is done by a designated reviewer. You would go to click and say it either meets or does not meet. And from there, it would go to a person who would do the 027, which is more a clerical thing, which is just sending out the right letters to people. You know, which is there's a letter that says we've reviewed your proposed use, it meets the regs, or there's a letter that says we reviewed your proposed use, and by the way, it doesn't meet the regs. We've done a review of, you know, so it's basically two things. It's either pre or post, and it met the regs or did not meet the regs, and that letter goes out. So this may also be, I picture this is like post review, but just for this, so it would be it's a non-analytical position would be filling it. And then, okay, study closure, pretty straightforward. Just close the study, we know that. If it's new information, that's SOP 024. Which we went over yesterday. and basically, and I think I showed you the form. I would, in a sense, you're going to get a form from the investigator filling out the top part, and there'll probably be a separate page on a Cicero where you check off it's none of the above or it's one of the big three. And if it's one of the big three, then it's going to get put on the IRB as an agenda item. And that should happen like same process that a new protocol or new protocol or modification or continuing review would have. And in this, there are associated SOPs for what to do with an investigation or what to do if you have to suspend or terminate research. But some of this I sort of picture most of the time. If you get good, you can do this in your head automatically for most things because you're just going to say no, no, no.
Mary, do you want to talk at all about SOP HRP 025?
Oh, this one, sure. It's bare bones. I did it. I think here's the issue with investigations. This is where people get into trouble. You can write in whatever you want, but what you want to be very careful is that when you write an investigations thing, you probably have several levels of investigation. You've got you're going to send an auditor out, never know that. The auditor comes back and says things are really screwed up. You're going to send 3 auditors out, start doing stuff. They're going to come back and say things are really screwed up. And then you're going to say, we got to get a committee together and do a big investigation. Okay, I mean that's fine. If that's what you do, that's fine. The most important thing you can do in what you do is you have to have what I would call escalation steps, rationale for escalation. And my recommendation is use if you look at the SOP 024, I think it's this. Oh, it's 5.3. If the IRB chair and IRB manager are unable to answer a question, follow SOP investigation. So the basic idea of this is that you look at it, and if you need to, you get a chair to look at it, and if you can't, you escalate. Now, you don't have to escalate to what I put in here. You can escalate to something else. So maybe your next step would be we're gonna send some auditors out. So I would say send auditors out. They come back and maybe they talk to the manager and the chair and they see if they can work it out. And then what I would say is, if based on the audit report, the IRB manager and IRB chair cannot figure out what's going on, you go to the next step. But this is what the key point is, and when you follow this, you want to do it methodically, is you assign people to do what they're doing. If they can't figure it out, if they can figure it out, they stop, and if they can't figure it out, they go to the next step. And those people do the next level. If they can figure it out, that's fine. If they can't, go to the next step. Here's the issue. The way you're going to get in trouble with an investigator is when you look at something going on and you go, holy moly, let's bring out the big guns, and you go to a full-blown investigation. And the investigator looks through your records and they found somebody very similar who you didn't do an investigation on. The chair and the IRB manager just did that. And the judge is going to say, the plaintiff attorney is going to say, you're picking on my client. You don't like my clients. You did, so you harassed them with this big investigation. And what you need to be able to do as the chair and the IRB manager is, no, we looked at the facts, and we realized that after looking at them, we couldn't, in this case, we looked at the facts, we could figure out what was going on, so we stopped. In this case, we looked at the facts, we couldn't figure out what was going on, so we went to the next level. Does that make sense? That's really where, and otherwise you can be sort of, you can really be, very flexible in how you do investigations, but you just want to make sure that that you have a fair process in terms of not having criteria to go from one step to another. And I've seen people get in trouble for that, for where it's all that they didn't follow their procedures, or they have gotten the whole thing has to be redone because of unfairness, because or arbitrariness. That is, you have to have a reason why you're doing an investigation, one person, and the other person you're doing it. The chair and the staff are just figuring it out on their own. You look puzzled.
Well, when we do audits, we do a whole bunch of different types of audits.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the investigation starts, okay, we'll do an audit. Our audits are, in my opinion, really thorough. You know, I guess we could do escalation from, okay, it's limited to consent right now, we just do consent on it. But generally, we're pretty conservative. We think there's a problem, we look at the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then bring those back.
Well, you can. I think the you just.
People call not fair and almost anything.
No, I know, but you
know
had,
that.
no, I realize that, and that's why you have to be able to show your procedures to somebody and explain how you followed your procedures.
Okay.
It's not that stuff has to be written down unless it's some Maryland thing.
So our SOP currently is, let's say it's a 4-cause audit. So walk through, we get information, we think there may be risk to a participant or harm, or God knows what's going on.
Right.
So what do we do?
Well, actually, but let's step back, because 99% of the time you're not going to do an audit. Somebody calls up and says, I've been using the wrong consent document in the past 4 subjects, but they're coming back next week and I'm going to have them sign the right one.
No, I'm not talking about that.
No,
I'm
no,
talking
but-
about the study coordinator says an investigator's
But
An
you-
allegation
right,
of
something.
right,
non-compliance.
okay,
Little
but,
like
but you're
that.
gonna you're gonna have
Deviation.
you're gonna have something that's not compliance.
Right.
How can you not do
Deviation.
an audit on that person, but you're doing an audit on the other person?
Because they have a plan, a correction. I can tell what's going on if they tell us we're using the wrong consent. They're coming back and they tell me everything.
Right. So that's sort of the key thing here is saying, if the arbitrary man, if they you can answer the question. Okay, there's sort of 2 steps. One is you can answer the question about a finding of non-compliance. It's all clear, so therefore you can skip that. And I think the other one would be. I don't know if I have it in here. I guess I don't have it in here, but it would be. The other thing would be that you can say that. Actually, the it's actually if you're unable to answer. Yeah, so basically you would take that and you say that's an allegation. Your next question is you need to figure out whether that is a finding of non-compliance. Is there any basis in fact? You can't figure out that question, so you're going to go to the next step. Does that make sense? But you want to be able to have that have that explanation. And I think it's not so much that you have a corrective action, it's that it's clearly because if you didn't have a corrective action, you still wouldn't do an investigation. You would just say you might talk to them about a corrective action. If you couldn't collaborate with them to do that, it'd be continuing non-compliance. So, but you don't need to do an audit to tell you that an investigator is not collaborating with you. And sort of things like that. There's a lot of ways to do this. This is not, you're going to need to rewrite this, and I can help you. But but you want to, I can tell you how to avoid a lawsuit. That's really what you want to do. And that lawsuit is going to come because, they're going to say, but this other person came to you with this allegation. You can say, look, the guy's telling me he's got tinfoil on his head to prevent the CT scanner from taking away his ESP, and the doctor he mentions works down the street and isn't even affiliated with the University of Maryland. I'm convinced that there's no basis to this allegation. I'm leaving it alone. This one, I can't figure out whether there's any basis to this allegation. I got to figure out what's going on. So it's sort of at each step you really have to do that and make sure that you're not jumping steps. that, ooh, this is really bad, we gotta go, or this guy's a bad player, we better go investigate him and slam him with us. That's really where you get in trouble.
Well, and then how do our routine audits, how would a lawyer look at those?
It's a routine audit, it's your policy.
Okay. Because I've heard you're picking on me by coming and doing a routine audit.
Well-
It's like, no, we're not.
So I noticed, well, or I didn't notice, we have a database that we keep track, I mean, because not all compliance is associated with the protocol.
Yeah.
Or not all non-compliance is associated
Okay,
with a
right,
single
right,
particular protocol.
right.
And not, I mean, we have participant complaints.
Yeah.
We maintain a database of those, so that we have some kind of way to track and follow up, because some of them go on for years.
Some of them keeps calling me back, telling me the voice in their head is still there and it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Do you what are your recommendations about keep documenting those or not documenting those?
No, well, I think it'd be, I mean, it sounds like the volume in the stuff you have makes it worthwhile to document. I mean, we're not talking about a regulatory requirement, we're talking about an operational issue.
Yeah.
How do we,
Well,
you know, that from day to day, we remember what's going on.
Right.
So, I mean, it's all, you know, that, I mean, I would make the judgment on how much work is it to document, what is the benefit you get out of it. And if it's just, if you do more work and you get very little benefit and the risk is low, I would think, you know, don't bother. But if it's higher risk, then to do that. But, and I don't know, what volume is in your database for doing this stuff? And are these mostly subjects we call them?
Oh, we've got everything. Sometimes we'll have subjects. Sometimes we have family members. Sometimes we have something
Right.
somebody that sells something on the web and says, where do I get more information about that?
Yeah.
Or,
we're not keeping track of every single one of those though, but participant complaints, anywhere from a dozen to almost 2 dozen a year.
Yeah.
Just participant complaints.
Yeah, well, I would, okay, so.
sometimes there's like 10 hours of work
Okay.
before the lady tells me they're
Actually,
in the head.
I'm gonna take it back, because I think what we're talking about is new information.
Okay.
And I would say what you want to do is fill out the form, new information. And when the crazy person calls you up to say, you know, none of the above, and file it. And when the person calls you up and complains, you want to write down the complaint in the new information form, and you want to then say, you know, it's none of the above. And do it that way. Should have thought of it. But that's, I mean, this is the sort of, if it doesn't fit in the above categories, it's new information.
We have to redo compliance. We have to go back to and start with incoming items, looking at new information, and then work from that. Which is not, right now, it's separated. It's completely separate from the IRB analyst, flow.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the IRB's determination. Like it may be something that, I wouldn't have followed up right away with an audit. And they say, oh no, you've got to audit 3 of their studies, 2 of them have to have been done already, and 1 of them has to be in the future. And it might be for some of their minimal risk studies that have 1 deviation that the IRB decided. But that's okay, because that's escalation of investigation for IRB
Yeah.
determination.
Yeah. No, I mean, the IRB can give verification. Yeah, so
Because most of the time, they're on track, but every so often,
yeah, I mean,
they want everything looked at for somebody.
I mean, I think the IRB's got to be clear that they're doing that because they need verification from sources other than the investigators that no material changes are taking place. I would actually recommend that whenever an audit is requested that those specific words are used. or something like that. And I'm going to guess you must have a process for doing big investigations, like that sort of inquiry type things when you have big time stuff. No. Or maybe. There you go.
So it used to be that our process was very similar to what you have here. You know, they would constitute a big committee, put IRB members together, have somebody chair, have a subcommittee. And that was anytime there was any kind of concern that there was a serious non-compliance issue. Well, that got impossible to do
Sure.
because there were so many.
Yeah.
So the process now is that we do a complete audit. We do a full audit. That information comes back to the IRB, and the IRB reviews that information, makes a determination whether it's serious non-compliance, continuing non-compliance, or serious and continuing non-compliance, and then they figure out either the investigator or whoever it is has developed a corrective action plan and proposed something to the IRB, or the IRB can say this is what you need to do to take corrective action. When that happens, University Council, the institutional official, and I, Mary and the IRB and the chair of the IRB, whoever's leading it, they get assigned a chair of the IRB to be kind of the overseer and lead of that investigation.
Because I'm thinking, one suggestion certainly would be that after the audit, that maybe you have a different, you and the chair and Bruce could sit down and decide whether it's one of the big three. Just leave it at that. But it would also be then, again, that if there are questions that are still unanswered at that point, you can even say, after, let's say you're doing a full audit, come back, you, Bruce, and chair are sitting around saying, well, I think, I'm still not sure whether there's serious noncompliance here. You could even have a thing that if in your opinion, another audit or an expansion of the audit would be enough, then you do that. And if in your opinion that's not enough, then you're going to go to the board and inquiry board type thing. So it's just making sure that at each step, if there's a choice about what to do, and it can be purely subjective, but at least you have to follow that. And just say, do we think not? You follow that, and then that's one of the most important things you can do with it. That sort of. The other thing I discovered, I don't know if you guys ever use this, are court transcriptions.
I saw that in your, I saw that.
Court transcriptions.
Yeah.
I found this out on misconduct inquiries because our attorney said, Patrick, we work with Patrick. He's a representative. He said, let's get a court transcription. Oh, it's just, they're like $50 a day or something. They're like, compared to the cost of recording and then having somebody sit down and type up stuff, and the stuff comes back right away. It's like you do that, and 2 days later you got a transcript, and it's like a court transcript. But they're not that expensive, and so maybe some, if you. And I every time we did these investigations, we would always we'd
I
wait.
did see that.
We'd record the minutes, and then we'd say, Julie, go do transcribe this, and it would be you'd have to take care of everything else and do all your stuff. And you 3 weeks before you get the minutes, and it's not you're busy, you got other things to do. So it's just a thing I discovered, and what a lifesaver, and when all is said and done, it's not that expensive. It's I don't know, I'm underplaying the price, but maybe it's maybe they're $20 an hour, but $160 to have a thing transcribed when you've got people who make over $160 an hour times 5 sitting around the room. It is tremendous lifesaver.
Now, are you talking about the discussion about what to do, or the discussion with the
This is
investigator?
whatever you want. It's usually testimony, it's reporting and testimony. What people. It's usually a testimony, but they can transcribe the whole thing if you want.
This is my experience. People will tell you what they're doing wrong if your pen's down. If your pen is up, they're a lot more clamped up.
Oh,
And I got
interesting.
transcriptionist. I see yes, no answers.
Yeah.
Not that I would love to have a transcription
Well, it'd be
person
interesting
sometimes.
to have, so for, the the faculty member that we're dealing with right now, it would be interesting to look back and see a transcript
Oh, yeah.
of what he said the first time, then the second.
Well, that's an
third,
interesting
fourth.
point. I haven't thought about that, but that's. I mean, I just certainly with the experience comes from misconduct inquiries,
Mhm.
I'll tell you that, which are bigger issues to some degree, and the couple times with the transcriptionist, it was just completely different than the times that there was some secretary who was assigned to take a recording and type it out. I mean, the next meeting would come around, there'd be no transcript. It was just something. So, but I don't know. Usually, yeah. I mean, we usually end up if we got to the point where we were in an inquiry type thing. At this point, we would always record what was going on. But so maybe you just do it without and take notes. But it's anyways. Think about it. That's all. Interesting.
Is this a good point to pause?
Yes. Yes.
Let's do an hour for lunch. Okay. And what's the afternoon?
Oh, I was